This program deals with devil worship and satanic beliefs. It contains explicit scenes and descriptions of violent crimes and rituals.
Americans are asking, who attacked our country?
You have declared a subliminal jihad against the United States. Can you tell us why?
Everything pertaining to what's happening has never come to the surface. The world will never know the true facts of what occurred, my motives.
And night fell on a different world.
And Iblis is thinking, I should be getting this position, not Adam, and this guy is created from dirt.
And how does the army feel about you being head of the Temple of Set?
And the conspiracy theorists can say what they will, but
I want you to give me power over Adam, and I want you to give me soldiers and minions and all of these things.
The people have so much to gain and have such an ulterior motive for putting me in a position I'm in. Will never let the true facts come aboard to the world.
And I want you to be able to give me the ability to whisper into the hearts of mankind.
And who was the grotto leader? Don't remember the name. You don't remember the name of a person who involved you in murder?
now these people are in very high positions yet.
Welcome back to Subliminal Jihad, episode 221. I'm your co-host, Dimitri.
I'm Khalid.
And today, we are roaring back.
We're hissing back.
We're hissing back.
We're meowing back.
We are meowing back. We're going full meowism today. This is another contemporaneous episode. I think we're going to release this shortly after
well, I think
recording
it actually matters. Like, you're like, oh, should we wait with this one and not talk about the election? But I think it actually is really relevant because I was thinking as I was researching for this one, this kind of was the cat election, it was very weird. First of all, I want to talk in a second about this topic and how it's kind of a little bit different from other cryptid topics that we've talked about. I mean, there are some that stand out. Jersey Devil, I think, kind of stood out. Chupacabra and Bigfoot, maybe are more similar to each other. Then this is a unique topic in a lot of ways. In fact, it's one that I'll go deeper into this later. But I always found this one kind of boring, and I never really wanted to really explore the British big cat phenomenon or the phantom big cat phenomenon more broadly, because it's just kind of I'm from the United States, so
right. I was gonna say, as an American, this one's funny. This one,
it's just what if an animal? Well, if an animal, is extremely common in the United States, also is here.
It's a big cat. There are literally mountain lions roaming in the hills outside of my house now. That
exactly.
When you go hiking in LA, you have to watch out for whom every now and then will jump out and steal your chihuahua or kill you, and it's just an accepted fact of life. So when you start reading these articles in British tabloids, but sometimes serious papers about the big cat spotted and everything. It's it's they're using the kind of language that we would use for Bigfoot.
Yeah.
Which is funny. And it's this mysterious thing that can neither be confirmed nor denied, or that, these farmers always see. And there's these sinister signs left over. And I don't know. But it's, the deeper you get into it, it is interesting.
In a way, that's what makes it interesting, though. The fact that it's such a not really a cryptid per se. It's just an idea. Well, it depends. There's it runs the gamut. Some people are oh, I'm sure some of the big cats that are seen are jinn. And we'll get into that. But they're not all necessarily jinn. It could be it's much more plausible than that. There's an undiscovered 8-foot tall primate in the Pacific Northwest that at least some of these things, and in fact I think it's confirmed that there are some escaped pets, some leopards and stuff that were escaped pets and things like that. It's a it's a much more plausible cryptid on the face of it, coming from a science perspective than than a lot of the others.
But it does make it a little more interesting because of that difference of a thing that exists in other parts of the world. Just to break down for Bill, because I actually maybe had heard of British big cats, but I feel did somebody ask us a question about them?
Yeah, well, this is
the last
right.
Q&A
this actually, I should mention this was inspired by a question from Young Howler, who asked us about
shout out.
the phenomenon of phantom cats and phantom dogs. Which I do, and I do want to tie that in a little bit. Like we're gonna mostly focus on cats and like the British big cat thing, but it is interesting how like there really was like a big like substantial tradition like of phantom black dogs,
Black
that
Dog, yeah, the
like
Led
people
Zeppelin
talk about all
song,
the
right?
time.
You
It's
know?
really a global thing, yeah, or the Taylor Swift song,
Oh, she has
which
a Black
is
Dog song?
yeah, well, it's named after the pub in London, I think. It's somewhere in
Mm,
England that is called the Black Dog, after the like historical fixation with black dogs, I think,
hmm
in sort of English folklore and British folklore more broadly. And really, like, there's even a hadith about like the black dog being the devil.
Wow.
So yeah, people have often associated black dogs with like supernatural happenings or with evil, but in
Well,
some cases they might be
the Black
benign.
Dog, it
Like,
sounds like it could be mm, a dog man a little bit.
yeah.
Of course that
Yeah, I
jumps
mean,
out.
well, yeah, there's like it's interesting because on one hand you're like, oh, cats and dogs are very different, and they are, but they're also like kind of an iconic pair. You always think of
Yeah.
cat and dog together. They're fighting like cats and dogs.
Right. Right.
They're the two archetypal pets. Like one kind of is like the pet of nomads, the other like the pet of civilization. I think it's like that's kind of what I'm getting at when I say like this is what makes British big cats interesting is that like it really brings out like and I do want to leave, I do want to go to the continent a little bit and talk about like by way of comparison, like the French like mystery animals and mystery cats, because like that
Right.
I
They
read a
have them
great
too.
article about that I want to get into at some point. But it is interesting to think about like what like the phenomenon of British big cats reveals about like and the this sort of idea like of these people on the island of Great Britain or in I guess maybe Northern Ireland would be also fall under the idea of like of British big cats too.
hmm
um
Yeah.
but
And the Scots have their own kind
oh
of
yeah,
cat,
yeah, they do. The Scots have a
the
lot of cats.
Cotchi, right?
Yeah, the
Or as I would say, the Kate Sith.
yeah, there's a Final Fantasy
In my
character.
horrible Gaelic pronunciation.
Right, yeah, the cat she, which we kind of talked about that weird pronunciation of she. It's not
Yeah.
spelled the same, like at least in the
But this
orthography
is
that I see,
spelled
but
Star Wars style,
yeah.
Sith, which I don't know if that, I mean, I don't know if that's where
Yeah,
the Sith
exactly.
from Star Wars like
I don't
etymologically
think
came from,
so.
or if it was like, or if it came from Set because George Lucas knew. But yeah, like the cat she, I found some chilling tales associated with like the legends of the cat she and
Yeah,
like
it's
Scottish folklore and the
hmm.
Taga room ritual, which folks like they're sacrificing a lot of things. So there's like a cat sacrifice ritual that I found one video about that is pretty chilling. And I guess if you like if you sacrifice enough cats on like a roasting spit for like several
Hmm.
days out in the forest, then eventually it will like summon a cat she who will like very Jin like
Yeah,
grant
and
you
I learned from
wishes.
this a lot. Like it's there's actually like a really rare but extant like wildcat. And but anyway, my point is in
Oh
Scotland. But my
yeah,
point is
how's it
that
related to the election? It's just-
well, what I was gonna say first of all was that or well, what I was gonna say second of all about the phenomenon in general is that it's very interesting what it reveals about people who live on this island, like what their relationship is with the idea of like wild nature and like what the big cat like represents for them about how like they've basically driven like or they're feeling that they've driven like the natural world from this island, even though I was learning that a lot of Britain, even like only like 7% of it is like heavily urbanized, like a lot of it is
Right,
agrarian. um
right.
so it is interesting like what like this notion that like there's these lions or these pumas or I learned a lot about cats in researching for this episode, honestly. I learned that
Yeah,
like
yeah.
puma is just a name for a leopard and it isn't like a
Oh,
different thing from a leopard. And like neither is a panther.
news to me.
um
Yeah, I guess a panther is
yeah,
actually like a black panther is a black leopard, which is rare,
exactly.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, a black panther is just a black leopard and a yeah.
Why do
um
they call a puma a
a
puma?
cougar, sorry, a cougar is a puma. Why do they call a
Oh,
puma a
right.
puma? Because there is a genus puma, which
Okay.
had maybe some other creatures in it at one time, but now its only extant species is the cougar.
Oh,
So I assume it's like a language thing where there was Yeah, a different one. So yeah, puma is a cougar. See, it's still like kind of confusing because yeah, I always thought of these as being like different things. Cougars
Right.
are even sometimes called panthers themselves because panthers just kind of means big cat. Um,
Okay. Okay.
yeah, like panther is like is a genus as well, like Panthera, that's the
Panthera.
cat
That's
genus
right.
that contains tigers, lions, jaguars, and leopards.
Okay.
Right. So yeah, it's like, but that's all like another like there's a lot of like interesting like subtle like like sociological like spiritual like stuff around I mean cats in general but and I think that is something that is relevant in the US context with particular election like I did track even before it was a notion to do this episode I posted about it on Twitter not too long ago this is like the cat election because first there
Mm.
was the whole thing with childless cat ladies right
Yes. Yes.
which like was sort of a marginal topic in the election but it does I think express something that is like a deep anxiety I've seen in the kind of political discourse or like social landscape in the US where it's like, it has to do with people not having kids, right?
Right. Right.
Like, and that cats are in some way replacing our kids,
Hmm.
you know,
Yeah.
or pets are in general. But cats are chosen in particular to represent that. Like, this spinster who just has like all her cats and they're replaced. And like, it kind of in a way harkens back to those old stories of cats you probably heard like the old wives' tale. I'm even calling it an old wives' tale, sorry. But like, you not to say that it's true, but just to say it's kind of a sexist term. But
Oh,
like,
yeah.
you
A
know,
matriarch's tale. Yes.
yes, yeah, the Quain, the slaying Quain's tale,
Mm.
of the cat that like sneaks into the crib and like suffocates a child to
Oh
death,
my God.
stealing the milk from its lips.
Wow.
You never
A
heard that
cat
before?
would do that. No, no offense to cat owners,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I feel like a
Well,
cat would do that.
Well, yeah, well, what you just said, like, so in like reading about like the sort of like folklore and like the lore, like cat lore, like for this episode, like try to understand it in a historical context, like
Hmm.
I did notice that that is like a persistent theme that like cats can't be trusted. Like
Right.
that, like they
Right.
are, like they live in our attendance and everything. Like they are like kind of our civilizational partners in a way, and like they're always around us.
Right.
But like
They have their own
they might
agenda,
like not really. Yeah, they have their own agenda.
which
Actually,
they kind of do in a way, like the in relation, especially compared to dogs, who are very
yeah.
much like team players. I mean, weren't we in Mongolia years ago, and somebody told us about how cats are like widely viewed as pretty much just like sus creatures in Mongolia. And
Hmm.
so they feel like there was some kind of proverb about like a dog will save your life, but a cat will steal your
Will
soul
kill
or something
you.
like
Yeah, a
yeah, a
cat
cat
will
will
kill
end your
you.
life
Yeah.
or something like that. And so there were a lot of stray cats running around for that reason. Like people didn't really want them. And then isn't like correct me if
It
I'm wrong, but in Islam, isn't it a little bit inverted where cats are kind of
it's
holy,
inverted.
but
Yeah.
dogs are dirty?
Dogs generally gotta have a bad reputation, like in Islam. Like
Oh,
there's no like negative cat hadith that I know of.
wow.
There might be, but in Bukhari, there's like it's like Islamophobes and stuff like always like Muslims hate dogs, and it is true that like a lot of
Hmm.
Muslims don't want dogs. Like I obviously people have heard him barking. And we talked about him probably in some
You're both
episodes. I
dog
have a dog.
owners, so a little biased.
I'm Maliki, so the one Sunni jurisprudential school that can have dogs.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, then it's all good.
Or yeah. So
Yeah,
I
but
mean,
the
you can
cat,
always
I
have a dog
mean,
as long as it's defending your home or like has some kind of purpose. That's like kind of the
right.
general ruling, but
I
again, they're
think,
supposed to like earn their keep and not just be like companion animals generally. But
right, catch
it's a
mice
different
and,
like it's a gray and dogs also, which is a common thing. Not to go down the rabbit hole of talking about Islam, but the like it's often like there's in like Sufi discourse, particular dogs have like a sacralized role, and there is in the Quran, Kitmir, the dog of the seven sleepers of Ephesus, who's mentioned, whereas cats aren't mentioned in the Quran. So, it's a little bit of gray area there. But anyway, I think that the example of Mongolia kind of that like being a folk tradition makes sense because I do think one thing that you can broadly say is that like dogs, even in the Islamic context, right? Like it's something like Bedouins like need, whereas
hmm
like more like sort of urbanites, they don't, they're less because they could be dirty, these like stray dogs, like they might
right.
bring
They
disease,
might want cats who like
yeah,
chase mice out of the
kill
house and
mice,
stuff.
protect grain, etc.
Right,
Yeah, like
right.
cats are great because they're gonna try to help save you from plague or whatever, things like that. So,
Yeah, that's
but
true. Yeah, there's a kind of a
yeah,
cleanliness association with cats in that regard.
yeah, but cats have always I wanted like the I wanted to read this like just as like sort of an example of that. Um, which is it's from a bestiary. It's called A Master of Game by Edward
Hmm.
Duke of York. It's a translation from an earlier French work, but talks about cats. So, this is an English guy, so kind of getting into the area of British big cats.
Uh-huh.
He writes, "The cat is a common beast enough, therefore I need not tell of his making, for there be few men that have not seen some of them. Nevertheless, there be many and diverse kinds of cats, after some masters' opinions, and namely of wild cats. Especially there be some cats as big as leopards, and some men call them loup cervier, and others cat wolves. And this is evil said, or like, not correctly said, for they are neither wolves nor cerviers nor cat wolves." So it's interesting, kind of like that blending of cats and dogs that I kind of want to get into a little bit later, but or cats and wolves in this case. Men might better call them cat leopards than otherwise, for they draw more to a leopard kind than any other beast. They live on such meat as other cats do, save that they take hens and hedges and goats and sheep, if they find them alone, for they be as big as a wolf, and almost formed and made as a leopard, but their tail is not so long. A greyhound alone could not take one of them to make him abide, for a greyhound could sooner take and hold fast and more steadfastly a wolf than he could one of them. For he claws as a leopard and furthermore bites right. Men hunt them but seldom, and if the hounds find peradventure such a cat, he would not be long hunted, for he soon putteth him to his defense, or he runneth up a tree. And because he flieth not long, therefore I shall speak but little of his hunting, for in hunting him there is no need of great mastery. They bear their kittens and are in their love as other cats, save that they have but two kittens at once. They dwell in hollow trees, and there they make their ligging and their beds of ferns and of grass. The cat helpeth as badly to nourish his kittens as the wolf doth his whelps. Of common wild cats I need not speak much, for every hunter in England knoweth them, and their falseness and malice are well known. But one
Mm.
thing I dare well say, that if any beast hath the devil's spirit in him, without a doubt it is the cat, both the wild and the tame.
Oh no.
Um, which
Oh
is
no.
it's very interesting that like, these are domestic cats that like almost everybody has. Or like a lot of people have, or like you see him all the time. Like everyone knows what a cat looks like, as he mentions at the beginning.
Yeah.
I need not tell of like what he looks like of his making,
Mm.
but there's some like they still like they're demonic in some way. They're up to something. Did you come
Hmm.
across like in reading for this the King of the Cats folk story?
Let me see which one that was. Was that on Government Scott or
I'm not sure where like I
let's see
kept coming
here.
across it like because it's kind of like a
I read
famous.
I read about the Beware the Cat story.
Oh yeah, Beware the Cat is like that's like one of the first like novels in English, which
Uh-huh.
it actually has like a version of the King of the Cat story in it. The
Oh,
basic
okay.
like there's like a lot of like versions of it. The basic story is that like a man is like walking around and a cat like comes up to him or he overhears a cat saying like tell Tom Tildrum that Tim Toldrum is dead. And that's like part of the formula of this story that like the names are kind of like nonsense or like weird names.
Okay.
And then the guy gets home, and he's got like his cat is like sitting there in the house and like his wife's there and he's telling his wife like the story and he's like these I saw these cats and they said like tell Tom Tildrum that Tim Toldrum is dead, but I don't know who Tom Tildrum is. Like how could I, tell I have no idea who this person is or who the other person is either. And then suddenly his cat like, sits up and speaks and says like old Tom is dead, then I'm the king of the cats. And he like runs to the chimney and is never seen again.
Oh my God. Wow.
Which, you know, I feel like the what that story like expresses, it might who knows like what that is supposed to be like getting at on I feel like there could be many dimensions of that, but like on my reading, what I understand that to say about cats is that cats like there's a sense that they have like a whole secret life and that like they're kind of playing this role or like they're keeping something secret like within themselves, like where
Mm.
they could be part of like this whole society and like your cat could be like next in line to like rule over a society of talking cats and like you wouldn't even know it,
Oh my God. Yeah,
like
they have
that's
a whole cat civilization going on, like a Pixar
yeah.
movie.
And yeah, and that's basically the idea of Beware the Cat.
Mm.
Like that story is kind of folded into like a broader kind of discourse of a guy who like learns to listen to cats and he sees them put on a trial of a cat named Mouse Slayer.
Right, right. Who
And
did
like
a
they
like a
have this
Me
whole kind
Too
of
thing, right?
civilization.
Yeah, did
I don't
something
know.
sexually
I don't remember what
inappropriate.
Mouse Slayer was accused of because I didn't like read the novel uh like fully. I just kind of like, I kind of skimmed over the trial of Mouse Slayer. I read the preceding part
Okay.
more intensely, but I know that, it's overseen by like a big gray cat that's like in charge of all of them. But yeah, at the end he gives a similar like message of to beware the cat, right? He says, I know these things will seem marvelous to many men, that cats should understand and speak, have a governor among themselves, and be obedient to their own laws. And were it not for the approved authority of the enthusiastic author I heard it from, I would also be doubtful. But this is like literally like a modern like British big cat tabloid like language. But seeing as like, but I heard it from a trustworthy person like a DERFA, a park ranger said. Anyway,
Yeah.
but seeing as I know the place and the persons with whom he discussed these matters before he experimented with strange and wonderful concoctions, because he took like a weird lozenge that made him able to talk to animals, I am in little doubt of the truth. This story proves that cats understand us and take note of our secret doings, and tell each other of our doings. It tells us that the use of the medicine he describes will let any man understand them as he did. I advise all men to beware of wickedness and avoid secret sins and mischievous private counsel. Otherwise, to their shame, the whole world will eventually know what they have been doing. If any man is so concerned that he gets rid of his cat, then that will prove his secret naughty living, and that he is more ashamed that his cat will see them than he is afraid of God and his angels, which watch and make note of all men's actions. We can
Mhm.
profit from Master Steamer, that's like the main character, from Master Steamer's experiences by living our open and our private lives in such a way that our own cat, who sees all our secrets, will have only honest and praiseworthy things to tell of. And the devil's cat, which, like it or not, sees and notes down all our misdeeds, will have nothing to accuse us of in front of God, who punishes our sins and wickedness with shame and eternal torment. Whenever you go about your business, remember this proverb: beware the cat. Do not tie up your cat while you are doing misdeeds, and make sure that neither your cat nor the devil's cat, which can't be tied up, will have any shameful things to accuse you of.
Wow, they're
Um,
keeping score. They're keeping
yeah.
the cat keeps the score.
Yes, the
Yeah.
cat keeps the score. Yeah. So
Interesting.
yeah, it is interesting to think about. And like again, that's like, there's this whole sort of genre like Reynard the Fox and all that stuff, like the sort of animal fables. And again,
Mhm.
that actually does kind of come from the Kalila Wadimna or the Pachatantra, the like animal fables in the Persianate and the Arabic speaking world. And also by way of the Persian Arabic, really originally those stories, the Kalila Wadimna stories kind of start in India.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay,
so it's
interesting.
that's like a whole thing that was kind of taking off in England during the sort of early modern late medieval period. And like with the whole like Tybalt, the Prince of Cats,
Oh,
famously
okay.
from Romeo and Juliet.
Yeah, yeah.
That's
Oh,
like
the Prince of
originally like a
Cats.
cat
Interesting.
character from Reynard the Fox. That's what Shakespeare's referring to there. It's interesting like this how this kind of feeds into, and you can see these resonances with the modern like British big cat phenomenon. So yeah, like we kind of summarize what it is, but basically it's like the idea, and it like kind of started to take off like around like the 70s, 80s.
Hmm.
And yeah, a lot of authors that I read were kind of saying that it's interesting how this big cat thing sort of supplanted. There was an interesting quote that I kept coming back to, and I really wanted to like read more about like how this happened. But this is Jeremy Hart. He wrote
Hmm.
this in a book called I think it was called Singing Barrows, something about singing barrows. Yeah, like yeah, I'm not sure if yeah, Cuckoo Pounds and Singing Barrows. Yeah, I did take it down. Okay. And he says, it is as if the great cat apparitions formed a secondary class of ghosts which only began to thrive after the eclipse of black dog traditions. One thinks of the parallel, the conflict of red and gray squirrels. I found that to be like a really
Huh.
interesting like notion that like slowly there had been all these phantom dogs at one time.
Hmm.
Um and slowly they like had kind of given way to these like there had always been some cat tales obviously.
But they gradually, now in the modern era,
Now they're
people
definitely like take its full precedence.
much bigger deal in
Um
the UK than
it's
black
like a
dogs.
Yeah, and I think that also has to do with the British media as well too, because yeah, like it's become kind of this like easy, like click like you got clickbait, or I guess maybe even if it's a paper tabloid, it's like just a standard bait story.
Right, right. There
Yeah.
was that really interesting article in a Paranormal Review, the Journal of the
Hmm.
Society for Psychical Research, and I forget
Hmm.
what year this issue was from. But there was that Play Them Out, Alien Big Cat, Cryptid Felids, the UK Media and Rural Unease by Alexander Hay. That was
Hmm.
a pretty good overview of the media angle to all of it and kind of the wider question of like what it means for like what do these so-called mysterious big cats like represent in like sort of the
Yeah.
British mind and
Hmm.
make some compelling arguments like you said about how the vast like majority of the land in the UK is rural or like farmland, but it's not wild land. Like it's a series of estates and farms and fields that have all been like chopped up a little bit like the national parks where like it's nature but it's like so heavily curated and sculpted by human hands and activity that it's not really nature. So then the big cat, when they pop up, it kind of like calls back to this unease that Britons might feel about like the tenuousness of their hold over this like so-called like wild nature that comprises outside of the cities in Britain. So yeah, I think they wrote here because they talk about like the farmers and like how the farmers would talk about like badgers and just how like the viciousness of them and like how you would
Yeah.
like ward them off and like how other
Yeah.
people there was always like there's also a couple layers of kind of conspiracies like in the popular culture in Britain
Yeah.
around
Hmm.
what's up with the big cats, all of whom are like kind of funny. They sort of echo like people try in like the Bigfoot culture in the US trying to like come up with like, well,
Yeah.
is Bigfoot just like a secret primate that we never found, and like, or is Bigfoot a djinn from another dimension, or blah blah blah. They kind of have this similar thing, but a lot of the
Although I
theories are
will
like
say that
mundane.
reading through some of those like freedom of information or whatever their equivalent like is like some of those disclosures from like DERFA, they're
Uh-huh.
like basically their like National Park Service or like their well, like Wildlife Protection Agency or like
Right.
Bureau of Land Management or whatever like the Bigfoot conspiracy target would be.
Yeah.
Like it they some of those documents they disclose like suss me out a little bit. Some of them did kind of seem like what's going on here? Like what do you know?
Well, I
What do
mean
you know
that's
about the
that's
big cats?
that's what a lot of
Like
eyewitnesses
um
say. I watched a few of these documentaries. There's people that swear up and down that they have had encounters with big cats and in some cases, very chilling encounters. There have been some instances of people getting attacked almost like Tucker Carlson style, like waking up with scratch
I
marks
thought
or
of the
something.
same exact
Right?
thing.
Isn't it
I
funny?
thought of that too. Like that, yeah, like there was one story I read of someone who was walking in the forest and then he was like knocked out and he woke up with like scratches on him.
Oh
And I
my
was like,
God.
this is fucking Tucker. This is the same story as Tucker. And, you know, I was thinking like to go back like a little bit to the American context and the recent events, like of course the other big cat story was they're eating the cats, that kind of thing, which
Oh yeah, they're eating the cats. Yeah, you're
yeah, yeah,
right.
yeah.
Yeah.
And
And
of course we
like
all know
voodoo vaguely invoked because he was saying that about Haitian people.
that
That
was
that
kind
was
of
the
like how they had
implication, right?
that was well, I feel like that was like the way that they tried to explain it afterwards, or maybe try to make it like embellish it. I feel like originally it was just like that they were, I don't know, really
Like
hungry
hungry.
and like they didn't understand like they're free food.
Right,
Like,
right.
well, this is kind of goes to my point that like basically they were completely dehumanizing these Haitian immigrants and saying that they were behaving like animals where they couldn't like understand that like a cat that they would see would be someone's pet, and
Right.
like that they would just, or that a wild goose would not be like something to just like hunt, that they were behaving like animals. And it is interesting how, in a way, like in some forms, uh, in some of the more like, mundane forms, the British big cat thing kind of mirrors the immigrant panic that you see, both, of course, in the UK, but also like in the United States as well, that like they are in some way foreign, that
Mhm.
they've been brought in here. Like they're not, obviously, they're known as alien big cats, right? That's the other
Yeah.
name for them,
Yeah,
the ABCs.
ABCs. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
ABCs.
yeah. And they're not alien in the sense they come from space, which is what I thought like the
No,
first
they're
time that I ever heard
illegal,
about them when I was
illegal
like
aliens.
Yeah, when I was like very young and I was like, oh, alien big cats. That sounds interesting. And I'm like, oh, these are just like pumas. Like that's boring. But
Don't have a visa. Yeah.
yeah, like, but yeah, that is the idea that like they're illegal aliens, and like they often are actually illegal aliens. Like you're not supposed to like own like a pet panther, you know,
Right.
and that's like part of like
That's
the a lot of the cover up lore is that like you
mhm.
know DERFA's like letting them or like the wildlife protection agencies like letting it slide. You know, they're like they find out about these escaped predators who don't tell us like about the threat they pose. You know,
Yeah, which is does mirror
yeah,
the kind of like ICE is shuttling around, like
yeah, yeah.
these illegals to like communities everywhere and covering it up and they're not tell it's like why doesn't it show up in the statistics? Like, oh well, they're covering it up, kind of thing. There's a little bit of that vibe there of like, oh well, whenever one like dies or gets hit by a car or something, like one of those like, park service like cars will just like speed up right away and just like take it and it'll never be seen again kind of
Yeah.
thing. That's one of the explanations. And the other one that does it comes up in all these like explorations of the topic is the I guess it was like the Exotic Animal Control Act of like 1976. That's like one of the mm, that's one of the main normie theories for what is happening with British big cats, right? Where basically like, and they have people that like cop to it that owned leopards or lynxes or pumas or whatever. And, instead of like turning them over to the government to be, I don't know, be like euthanized or whatever, when they outlawed ownership of that without a license, I think they made it so you have to get like a certain license or whatever. A lot of people just like
Yeah.
release them into the wild.
In
And
like
so,
1974 or something, there was
right,
sometime around there, like mid 70s, there was like an act like that was like licensed. You had to have these licensed animals or something, or made them. Yeah. And so the
right.
idea was that they were all released then. And I'm sure some of them were just like
No,
let
they,
go into
they
the wild.
they
Yeah.
talked to people that did
Yeah.
release like leopards and stuff into the wild, and I guess you could say that maybe there was like small groups of them where they could mate with each other and then maybe have cubs and then or whatever, and then maybe have like a couple generations or whatever. There was another one I watched where they mentioned this one guy mentioned that one of the winters around maybe like 2010 was like the coldest winter in almost a century or whatever, and
Hmm.
that maybe 2011, but that there was like a big drop off in sightings of big cats like after
Hmm.
that, and his hypothesis was that maybe there were some like offspring of original like freed illegal big cats that survived for a while, but then like that severe winter must have like wiped a lot of them or maybe all of them out because like they're not native to Britain and
Hmm.
couldn't hunt enough to like survive. And that was like his kind of hypothesis about maybe like what had led to the uptick in like the 70s, 80s, 90s around like mysterious big cats. But at the same time, there's so many other people that, you know, have had experiences still, I think, since then. It's not like they totally stopped. So it feels like it doesn't cover it. That probably covers some of them. I mean, they have found, I think, they had photos of like they did catch and like kill like a lynx, and
Yeah.
okay, it's like
Yeah.
okay,
It
they
definitely
could
has happened
categorize
before.
it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. But
Um,
but these all
no.
most of these stories fall in a much more liminal category of like they don't have a body to examine. They might have like a blurry video, but like it's in that realm of like Dogman Bigfoot encounters a little bit,
Yes, it
right?
is definitely in that. Well, yeah, like, and I think that it is similar to Dogman and Bigfoot in that I think a lot of the quote unquote big cats that are sighted or especially photographed, like, are not big and they're just cats. Like, and there's like a scale issue,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
where
no,
they're kind
true.
of like far away
At
and like
night,
things like the scale seems kind of weird, like the grass is maybe like, whatever, like there's some kind of weird angle or like the proportions like are off just by some kind of trick of like the light or like just the scene and the camera angle and it looks like, oh yeah, well you're telling me that's a panther, like you're priming me to like see a panther and I'm seeing like what is a panther but like just a big cat,
yeah.
a
Like
big house
sometimes
cat basically. They look
sometimes
like,
I
unless
see
you're
a
an
big
expert you
ass
can't really
cat,
tell a difference. Yeah,
right? Like so every now and then I come across a cat, I'm like, damn, that's a big ass cat. But it's like not, like a big cat,
Yeah.
like it's
Yes.
but like from a distance, maybe like, tricks of the light and all
Well,
that.
definitely. There definitely are some cases where like there's
Yeah.
a viral video of like Panther and like then it turns out to be like literally like someone's just pet cat.
It is
And
funny though that like they're so kind of like it's such a big deal to like British people. Like that also it kind of leads me to like the next interpretation of British big cat phenomena, which is that they are kind of like fairies or jinn or something like that. Like they
Mhm.
are interdimensional beings of some kind.
I'm sure that there are some that are Jin.
Well,
But
yeah.
it's interesting because this one has like a lot of different layers, like, than like for instance with Bigfoot, like there's no question of like, oh, are they just escaped pets and like, a more mundane for there being occasional, big cats seen that are actually like big cats and not mistaken identity or whatever.
Right.
That is like doesn't require the existence of an entirely new animal species that
Yeah.
has never been discovered or anything like that. But then it's like, okay, well, another big issue is like, is there a breeding population? That comes up a lot. It's like, is there a
Yeah.
self-sustaining breeding population of these cats, or do they just occasionally get out? And like, that's the big, I feel like the people who are like British big cat diehards, like
Yeah.
that's where they like generally fall. In the same way with Bigfoot, where you have like the kind of rift between people who know the truth that Bigfoot is a djinn and
Right.
people who like insist that it's like an undiscovered primate.
Right.
The rift in the big cat issue is more like the skeptics will be like, okay, there are some escapes. The most of the believers, are like, no, there is a self-sustaining British and breeding population of
Hmm.
big cats out there. And then there are, kind of the interdimensional Bigfoot people who are like, these cats are more than that. Like, there's something going on. Like, why
Which
can't we find them? Which,
which
I
is,
am inclined to think
you know,
there's something going.
there's an interesting thing to explore with that because the legends of like big cats and things like that in the British Isles, like there is kind of recurring precedent for it, probably going back into like the deep druidic mists of, a
yeah,
1,000+ years ago. And like I said, some of the Scottish folkloric, like the Celtic myths around like evil
yeah.
supernatural cat jinn that come to you and offer like that they're very evil, but like they'll do wishes for you, or like it kind of people do it like a money sacrifice ritual kind of way to like summon the cat she,
Hmm.
which is just like a sus kind of like supernatural cat that like shows up and I guess talks and like will like interacts with you the way like a machine elf or a demon or a djinn generally would. And so those things go back far. And also, something about, I think there's a little more of like kind of an academic sociological explanation in that I think what is it, the Alexander Hay um article that I was
Hmm.
referencing, where he kind of says that like the answer, like why are ABCs such a compelling part of our contemporary culture? He says the
Hmm.
answer lies in the nature of the UK landscape and our relationship with it, which is still essentially agrarian. Despite the UK's large population, only 7% of its area is urbanized, which includes roads and built-up rural infrastructure as part of its total. Meanwhile, the countryside, or the utilized agricultural area, as it is referred to by DEFRA, amounts to 71% of the UK's land area as of 2014. An aerial view of the UK reveals not boundless wilderness, those small areas that remain, nor vast cities, but a vaster still patchwork quilt of fields, enclosures, and farmland. The countryside is not a natural construct. It is the product of human intervention, relentlessly shaping and controlling the land and sweeping away any ecosystems that get in the way. Yet this victory is only a temporary one, as the outbreak of foot and mouth in 2001, the BSE crisis, and anxieties over tuberculosis demonstrate. It is only through the constant cycle of planting, growing, harvesting, plowing, and rebuilding that nature is held at bay and with great effort. Farmers are not as one with nature, but forever at odds with it. Fox hunting and other illegal blood sports, persecution of birds of prey, and reintroduced species such as beavers, and the relentless scapegoating of badgers all reflect the state of affair. I mean, we're in America this week. Everyone's scapegoating badgers in the
Hmm.
badger state for
Uh,
voting for Blumph.
or yeah,
Yeah,
blah,
another
blah,
connection. So with large predators such as bears, long since annihilated and only legal restrictions holding back the use of pesticides, it is clear that the rural experience is antithetical to the natural world. Speaking anecdotally, several acquaintances of mine, all from rural backgrounds, speak about badgers with a kind of near superstitious dread, dwelling on their innate, quote, viciousness and ways to ward
blah.
them off. This may seem bizarre to someone from an urban background, but that is to underestimate how landscape and our relationship with it molds and influences our culture, ethics, aspirations, and fears. The rural horror subgenre is fittingly closely associated with the UK landscape, as films such as Kill List and Blood on Satan's Claw demonstrate. In the popular imagination, the countryside is where the wilds and the herbs or urbes clash, and the wilds often prevail. In this vein, ABCs are a real life rural horror story, just as compelling, but potentially tantalizingly rooted in fact. For a farmer whose victory over nature is only temporary, even in the tamed English countryside, the sight of a relatively large predator, such as an adult boar badger trundling across his land at night, or a fox prowling near their henhouse, is a provocation and a reproach, another front in a long war that has been waged since the Neolithic, and an ugly hint that defeat may, in the end, be inevitable. Is it any wonder, then, that the folk devils of the modern British countryside, the alien big cats, are even bigger, more savage and primal, more mysterious and elusive, and potentially more dangerous? In the ABC, we see nature as a worst case scenario made flesh, something that can neither be tamed nor exterminated, and which can assert its dominance wherever it pleases. It is a rural nightmare and echoes the earliest days of agrarian civilization when wolves and worse still prowled the outskirts of small, vulnerable settlements. Real or not, the ABC is a reminder that our rule over the land is at best tenuous and perhaps the real illusion. That, then, is why it captivates us and forever prowls the limits of our domain. No, no,
Yeah.
I don't know. I like that. I like all that. I don't know.
No.
Like,
I definitely like that. And I think that like that's definitely like an element there. I don't think that that is like, as I've kind of talked about a little bit before, like I don't think that's necessarily mutually exclusive
oh no.
from like the idea that they're Jin. Not that like that
No,
there are
I'm
that
very
there's
yes
like
and with that, right?
yeah,
Is that
exactly. Like it's like yes, very
this
yes. And
explains why we care and like why
speaking of Del
humans would like
Close, which is
fear
the
them,
other
you know?
cat Trump connection, because
Oh,
remember
yeah.
that that Del Close disclosed that he leaked that Trump is actually possessed by his childhood pet cat. Um,
Right.
in that comic that he made.
Wasn't that like a weird Batman like parody that had did it have Trump in it? I remember it had a
Yeah,
was
it
like
literally
Catman.
was well, he wasn't like a cat. It wasn't like a Batman parody, no, but it was like
Okay.
about uh Trump had some kind of like psychedelic like demonic experience where like his humanity was like merged with that of like his pet cat that was like some kind of like uh guardian or like spirit, but it was also like sort of like like a hunter, and at the end like they fused together and Trump is like I feel different, like I'm hungry, like, and then you like it pans out, and I mean, it was like a twist that it was Donald Trump in the end, pans out, you see Trump Tower. I just like conveyed it badly, but the point
I
is
do
that Trump
remember
is
that
possessed by a
now.
cat. You can listen to the Del Close
Wow.
episode
That's funny
for,
because
you know,
I remember a few years ago, like the sort of like dissident right, like Twitter accounts. I remember seeing it kind of go around a lot. They were very fond of like the, toxoplasmosis like hypothesis about it. It really was actually almost like a biomedical extension of like JD Vance's childless cat lady kind of thing, like
yeah,
a
I've heard that
literalization of
before
it.
that like they make you go insane having too many cats. Yeah.
Not just go insane, but like they actually because I think one thing they did find in a study is that when rats or mice were infected with toxoplasmosis, it turned off something in their brain that made them afraid of cats. Like basically.
Mhm.
So it basically made like mice like see a cat and be like, "Oh, cool, a cat." And then the cat would eat them, right?
Uh-huh.
So and of course like I do not think this was like substantiated in any way, but of course people took that and ran with it and were like, "Oh, well that explains why people that have cats and that, handle cat poop or whatever, which is like technically how you could get toxoplasmosis, like especially if you live in an apartment with one. That explains why all these cat ladies are like basically literally mind controlled by their cat. And like
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
why they have an attachment to their cat. They're not gonna have children, they're everything else because like the cat actually is like giving them like a parasite that mind controls them into like over identifying with the cat. Which
Mhm.
like, obviously I don't think that's true. We're not well, even though we're dog owners, we're not going after cat ladies or cat guys. Also funny, like cat boys. I immediately think of like Nick Fuentes. Like I forget if he
Yeah.
was like tactically dark MAGA or not in this election, or if he was like voting for he was like supporting Kamala in some weird way, but heavily associated with Cat Boy, kind of, I guess he's a fan of Cat Boys, right?
I guess
And
so. Yeah,
Trump
I don't
was kind of a Cat
really.
Boy, yeah.
Well, according to Del Close, but I will say Trump was often portrayed as being a lion, right? Like even in like,
Right, right. His
pro-Trump.
hair is very
Yeah,
lion-esque,
he has a
right?
mane of sorts. Yeah. He
Yeah.
certainly has a mane.
Half
And
Scottish also.
oh, wow.
Saying.
Yeah, and they often did use like the cat she or the cat in general like on heraldry. And they do have like their own wild cat. And that's one of the like the big like folks like things with the ABCs because they like there was for years like this idea and they're always like a lot of the time these the big cats that are reported to be out there like stalking sheep and stuff and the farmers are talking about they're always black, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
And you know people have been talking about and Tyson talking about this and like in the 80s they actually discovered like a hybrid with the Scottish wildcat which people knew existed but was like rare and domestic cats that they called the Kellis cat, which is like a 4 foot long cat, pretty big.
Hmm.
Um, and it, is like melanistic, it looks black. You can look up the Kellis cat, Kellas.
Yeah. There was a
And
woman
yeah, like
named
they
Di who like bred some, like kind of captured some of them and then bred them, right?
oh I don't even
I think that
remember
was a book that
hearing that
you
element.
added.
Yeah. Yeah.
I forget what her name is. It was Di something.
Yeah, I think she
Di Francis. Di Francis.
yeah. I don't know if she read them. I don't think I even read that book. I think I just might like posted it there and forgot about it. I watched the documentary they did on like the World of Tomorrow or whatever, like that weird 70s documentary about them on the trail of the big cat.
Oh yeah, that was pretty
Yeah.
good. That was pretty good.
Yeah. You should okay, word.
I did watch
Yeah.
that.
So yeah, it's so there you go. So there's something where like this is kind of like an undiscovered like, feral hybrid that's out there, you know. Um and it's kind of like it's not like its own species per se, but it is like I think a fertile hybrid,
Right,
and it
right.
could be melanistic, which they hadn't like necessarily considered before. Um yeah.
And that's kind of the only example you would actually have besides like escaped exotic pets that were imported from
Yeah.
elsewhere of like a large cat predator. Because even though they probably had them thousands of years ago, they've long been extinct. I think the largest like kind of predator mammal is like a type of badger, right?
Hmm.
So it really is like, or like a fox, which are not that big, So I guess it does pop out. It is foreign, but I guess these Kellis cats, I guess
Hmm.
they weren't hypothesized to like sort of breed and spread down into England, right?
No, they're pretty confined to the Scottish Highlands.
Hmm.
And some of these like alien big cats people see are like bigger than even, the Scottish wildcat would be.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, or the Kellis cat. Uh, so yeah, like I read a lot that like the purebred like Scottish wildcats are like kind of being like wiped out actually by not melanistic ones, not like necessarily black looking ones, but
Hmm.
like a lot of them are now hybrid or that are sort of blended with like feral domestic cats, and there's not too many like pure Scottish wildcats left, and there's like conservation efforts around that. Um, but yeah. So yeah, but I think that like, to bring it back around to what you were saying, like I think that this the idea that like there's something like spiritual or like otherworldly or not material or extra physical to this does relate to how like this is has to do with like a spiritual like yearning
Hmm.
or like a spiritual relationship or an anxiety around cats that even can sometimes express itself in the form of like magical or occult practices. Like I mean, of course, there's like the idea that like we all know about that like witches can transform into cats. Pretty famous, like
Oh,
basically
for
the most
sure.
famous thing that witches would do in early modern Europe and everything. But there are also like examples of that and that's like where I think it's like again it's not like a literal thing, it's kind of being a bit figurative, but
Mhm.
that's where I almost kind of can see like that there is something in a way like rich like or perceived as being, or I'm kind of articulating this thought for the first time, but there's something that's like kind of occultic in a way about like at least the perception of this cover up that like
Mhm.
feeds into the phenomenon of the big cats. Like I was thinking about, I read this really uh weird article. It was like, your very classic kind of like racist article from the 1950s.
Mhm.
And it was written about like British colonies in Africa, or British rule in Africa. And it was mostly about, the or like post colonies as but kind of like the problems of governing Africans and things like that.
Uh-huh.
And a big theme in this was the African belief in witchcraft, right? The widespread belief in witchcraft that was
Of
experienced
course,
there.
yeah.
Um, there was this guy. Let me look at what the author of this article is. The article is called Lycanthropy in Africa, and it's by W. Robert Foran. So, but yeah, it's called Lycanthropy in Africa, but it's not just about transforming into wolves. A big element is transforming into cats and leopards. And he talks about, I'm going to skip a little bit, to
Hmm.
where he talks about it. He talks about a society called the Human Leopard Society.
Oh,
Uh,
wait, are you talking about human leopards?
yeah.
Oh, when I've read about human leopards before, that was a thing in Stephen Ellis's Mask of Anarchy. He
Hmm.
talks about, I think Graham Greene wrote a story about, he spent some time in the west coast of Africa in Liberia, and wrote some kind of like secondhand things about like human leopards, which were ultra secret sort of like juju societies that would engage in a type of human sacrifice that would they would leave the victim kind of, they like kidnap somebody and then leave them with marks that were characteristic of like a leopard attack. And I guess the idea of this would be that like the initiates would sort of like would like do a kind of lycanthropy thing and like transmorph themselves into like leopards and go out. And it was always like a very taboo thing. I'm sure whatever you're gonna read is gonna be racist, probably, but
Well, it gets a
um,
little bit
but it is an
racist, like
interest, even up
know.
into the 90s, of like one of Charles Taylor's most like feared like right hand men. I've heard in like the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, I think even like people refer to him as like, oh, he was a human leopard, like kind of
Mhm.
like the scariest thing you could possibly be,
Yeah,
because
I guess
you're
it's
a
kind of
serial
like,
killer. You're an occult serial killer, basically.
yeah, it's kind of like, adrenochrome, like frazzle drip stuff. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, this guy says, like, the Mendi are a law-abiding people, with the sole exception of those who were members of the Human Leopard Society. It is not improbable that the powers of the latter society were, and since have been, greatly exaggerated in its activities, never quite so serious as the government of Sierra Leone formerly believed. Be that as it may, like most secret societies, the Human Leopard Society rendered it extremely difficult to ascertain exactly what was the real extent of evil or good which could fairly be attributed to it. And
Mhm.
yeah, it kind of describes what you're talking about, like, just like a bit more detail. At first, victims of this fiendish society were relatives of its active members. They were selected at secret meetings of the committee. The victims were later waylaid and killed by men in the guise of leopards. The murderers plunged a three-pronged knife into the neck of the victim from the rear, separating the vertebra and causing instant death. And they also tore open the stomach in the manner of leopards after making a kill. When more victims were needed, outsiders were compelled to become members of the society through the expedient of giving them a meal in which, quite unknown to the guests, human flesh had been cooked and mixed with other food. When
No,
duly
oh my
apprised of
God.
this unpleasant truth, they were forced to provide a victim as part of the initiation rites.
They gave you meat
Members
as a clue.
yeah, exactly. Membership of the society increased rapidly. As the greatest possible secrecy was observed, it became difficult, if not practically impossible, to bring the criminals to justice. Any of their selected victims who were fortunate enough to escape death, when subjected to cross-examination, invariably insisted most emphatically that they had seen nothing at all of what had transpired during the attack made upon them, and it merely seemed as if a great wind rushed past. The police were up against a brick wall. They found it quite impossible to obtain evidence likely to secure a conviction. Before seizing a victim, the human leopards always covered themselves with the skin of that animal and even imitated its exact vocal calls. In the paws of the leopard's skin were fixed sharp and pointed knives, shaped to resemble the claws of that animal and intended to inflict similar wounds to those caused by this predatory beast. All this made it more difficult to prove their horrible crimes. After killing a victim, they clawed open the man's stomach. Both the heart and entrails were devoured. For many years, a stern fight was waged against the Human Leopard Society in West Africa. Finally, it was generally accepted as a fact that this course of its reign of terror, that this vilely conceived organization had practically been suppressed. During the course of its reign of terror, however, the society had been all-powerful. That this evil has not ceased entirely, as was optimistically presumed, is evident from fairly recent attacks brought to light. In June of 1946, some official statistics were published about the murders committed by this much-dreaded society in Nigeria. The government of Nigeria stated that so far the deaths of 145 persons have been established as being murders committed by the Human Leopard Society, while charges of murder have been brought in more than 100 cases. He added that these facts suggested the substantial success attending the efforts of West Africans themselves to combat the evil, for they had now come together in fighting against these peculiarly revolting crimes. So yeah, he talks about how there was a leopard camp, an anti-leopard campaign society that was formed, to drive against these murderous criminals. He says it wasn't a genuine outbreak of lycanthropy, but it tends to show the credulity of superstitious Africans. This is what I'm talking about concerning such matters. For the majority stoutly maintained were-leopards were solely responsible for all these evilly inspired murders. The superstitious beliefs of Africans are ever most difficult to combat and dispel. Where they relate to instances of alleged lycanthropy, indeed, it is next to impossible to achieve this result. There's another part of this I want to read where he kind of flips a little bit, and it kind of mirrors the sort of credibility games that happen in a lot of these big cat articles that you see today, where it's oh, but it was seen by this person, like others have said. They're always trying to kind of play games with the issue of the credibility of the claims, but yeah, this did remind me a little bit of that story of the I'm forgetting what it was called. It was in Australia. It was the something tiger. Did you read about that?
There's an Australian dimension of this as well, which is interesting, right? There's some legends in Australia about big cats, right? About unlikely big cats.
I mean, there are unlikely big cat stories everywhere, I guess,
Some in the US, I noticed.
Yeah. There are some in the US too. Yeah, there was was it the Queensland tiger? Yeah, the Tantaluna, the Tantanoola tiger. The Tantanoola tiger.
Okay.
Yeah, then there was, it's giving me a pop-up. Hold on. Obviously accessing this from a very reputable website. Yeah, the Tantanoola tiger.
Yeah, mysterious animal.
Yeah, Tantanoola is known for the Tantaluna tiger, a phantom cat, which supposedly stalked the area during the late 19th century. The animal was shot by one Thomas John Donovan, which was believed to have been the mysterious predator. The animal turned out to be more like a wolf than a cat. It was later determined to be an Arabian wolf, though how it arrived in South Australia has been a subject of a number of theories. But I also read this article that talked about how there actually was an outbreak of Tantaluna tiger attacks that were committed by people. Yeah, let me see. I'll start here. I guess some men on December 1910, 3 hunters from Tantanoola drove down to the Lake Boney Flats for a day of snipe shooting on Mr. Chance land. The men started working a big scrub paddock, but as a southwest wind picked up, they were hit by a dreadful stench. The awful smell of death was coming from a dense stand of tea tree about 800 meters away. One of the men went to investigate, but the stench becoming more powerful as he got closer. After finding a way into the tea tree was difficult until he stumbled upon a hidden but well-worn path into the labyrinth. About 23 meters in, he beheld a chamber of horrors. Someone had carved a yard out of the middle of the thick tea tree. All around were freshly killed sheep and lambs, and more rotting carcasses besides. while overhead on wires hung long lines of bloody sheepskins.
Oh my God.
Other of the hunters and the two men were astounded to find a second hidden yard, larger than the first, which contained 42 recently slaughtered sheep and lambs piled 2 and 3 deep, all of which bore the brand of Mr. Shan, someone who had been having his sheep killed, and leading them to suspect that there had been this, a return of the Tantanula tiger.
Oh.
Um, so yeah, they suspected this guy who was a tramp as he led a cadaverous, middle-aged Tantanula creep named Robert Charles Edmondson through the bar in handcuffs. The hobo was in reality Detective Herbert Allchurch, sent from Adelaide in disguise to snoop around and find out who had been selling sheepskins on the sly. Allchurch had elicited more information and discovered 5 other concealed slaughter yards and shearing stations. This new Tantanula tiger was every bit the newspaper sensation his predecessor had been, and hundreds of people now flocked to the rough country to see these charnel houses for themselves, with photographers selling postcard souvenirs. The committal hearing of Robert Charles Edmondson was held on 18th January, with him charged with having killed 76 of Mr. Shant's sheep. The accused accomplice, 20-year-old laborer James Bald, made a full confession. From September 1910, he said he'd made good money helping Edmondson round up, kill, and skin sheep. But in December, when the lair was discovered, the older man had threatened to blow his brains out if he said anything about their crimes. So, yeah, I mean, I guess like they also had a financial motive, but it is
Right.
interesting that they had like the same kind of like modus operandi of like this previous kind of like wolf animal that was, originally thought to be a tiger, this strange like phantom beast. And
Hmm.
it did kind of
Were they
remind me
dressing
like
up as one? Were they dressing up as
uh
a animal of some kind when they were going to steal sheep?
um like people really thought it was an animal.
Okay.
So I don't know if they were,
So they
but
maybe made it look in the same way that the Leopard Society would use that like 3-part knife that would make it look like a leopard had killed you. They wanted to sort of create the impression an animal was doing it, right?
Yeah,
Right.
that's definitely,
That
and
to
that's definitely
hide
what
their
people
tracks.
believed. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Interesting.
it did remind me of like that one. I don't know if you watched this, but there was a documentary about the British big cats. It was kind of long. I found it on YouTube. Let me see. I think it was Chasing Shadows, Britain's Big Cat Mystery. Did you get a chance to watch this?
I
They
watched a
were going
couple.
through a bunch of different evidence, and one of them was like a killed boar.
Uh-huh.
And like they
Oh, wait,
interviewed like a
Chasing
cat.
Shadows, right?
Yeah,
Oh, yeah,
yeah,
I did
yeah.
watch that. I did watch that last
Right.
night.
And they interviewed that cat expert at the end, and they were like,
Right.
like it seems like a person did this. Like it seemed like a person.
The one
This.
with the boar, the wild boar
Yeah,
was split open. There were a couple puncture marks like on its neck, but they were
yeah,
like very big and deep and wide. And he was like, that's not like a normal big cat like bite mark. And then there was a bunch of scat, like
yeah,
cat scat
exactly. Yeah,
next to the carcass. And he said that
yeah.
like that's not what
Cats
cat
would
like,
never poop where they eat.
they don't shit where
Animals
they
just
eat.
don't do that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And
And
so,
also, I guess he said like big cats always have like diarrhea, like usually after they feast. So like he was even like examining the scat and was like, this is
yeah.
like too kind of like
And
consistent.
they asked the people who photographed it, like, is this a hoax? And they're like, no, it wasn't us. Yeah, I'm not sure if that was the same one as the boar. Maybe it was, but it was,
I
yeah, like
think
there were
that
two of them
was
that were like, yeah,
I think that was
maybe it
it was
was,
near
maybe
the
it was.
end
Yeah.
when they called up the
Yeah, yeah,
guy and he's
yeah.
like, absolutely, you think that like we would have had to like kill a boar ourselves and then put
He
it there
was
and then put
really
a bunch of
sussed
scat next
out.
to it?
He was really sussed out by the boar. He was like,
Yeah.
I feel like someone, like he was like freaked out like a little bit, like what the, like very, like bizarre. Yeah, but it
Well,
was weird.
it does
Like,
get another thing that has an overlap to like American context that we haven't brought up yet is like cattle mutilations, right?
yeah,
Like,
it's similar
and
to that. Yeah.
it's like, oh, is it like UFOs? Is it a secret government project? Is it like occult groups that are doing this to like for
hmm
some like weird ritual
Yeah.
purpose? And
hmm
I don't know if they ever had like a quote unquote satanic panic around like they're occultists, like they're killing sheep or whatever. It seems like it always got the direction was always pointed to big cats, but like, what if, I mean, in that case, they were just hoaxing a documentary crew, but is there, can
Unless
we
they
make an
weren't the ones
allowance
who
for
hoaxed it and they just came across it. And so that's like the thing with like
true,
ostension. That might have been
right?
that might have been the purpose to like suggest. But that's interesting, like how there is I was watching like a lot of like documentaries about cats. Because I was just like, wow, like I can't, just learning like that's interesting. And like I was like, let me see like what that looks like on YouTube. And I
Yeah.
found this one nature documentary, and it seemed normal at first, but then like what really struck me about it was that it was narrated in the first person from the point of view of the cat. Like this was like, a typical like Nat Geo or like BBC documentary or something. And it was just like, but they were just like, I'm hungry, stuff like that. And I'm like, there's this weird kind of like,
like my ancestors evolved like 5 million years ago. Like, is it like that or?
Like no, it was more like, it wasn't like facts about like the cat necessarily. It was more like the shadows are my cover, stuff like it was not like his day-to-day life, like kind of
it's like a cat that doing a monologue about being a cat.
Exactly.
Okay.
It was basically your standard nature documentary, but instead of saying like he, like, but like, but Crooked Nose sees, it's like I see, it's like that. Yeah.
Interesting.
It was
getting
like
inside your brain.
And there is kind of this, obviously there's this identity in like where and I'm not saying that like, this is a widespread phenomenon of like ostension, but it might be like in some way, and that's kind of maybe where I see like the sort of connection between the perception of the human antagonist and also like the cat and also the people who like become kind of caught up in this. That kind of brings me to the last part of this. Yeah, this is kind of the coup de grace of this article, as it were, where he says, "It might well be said of lycanthropy as practiced in Africa, names whose sense we see not fray us with things that are not." I think it's a quote from Edmund Spenser's poem. "The most convincing instance of lycanthropy in operation within my knowledge was staged in southern Rhodesia during 1933 and vouched for by a European doctor, a reliable eyewitness of the episode. It occurred during the customary harvest rituals held in October of each year by the Mashona. Unlike Count Byron de Porok's experience in Ethiopia, the Rhodesian doctor was concerned with were jackals and not were hyenas, but the salient features of both cases happened to be almost identical. The doctor's experience must have been a particularly gruesome and obscene spectacle to witness. It is impolitic to give prominence to the latter aspect, for what he states did transpire is too depraved and objectionable for repetition. I omit these sordid details. Without the knowledge of the assembled Africans, the doctor had concealed himself in a treetop close to and overlooking the scene of the rituals enacted by the Mashona. He had taken up his post before the actual start of these obscene ceremonies, being actuated by a keen desire to learn at first hand some details of the harvest festival staged by the Mashona. I quote his own account of what he witnessed, merely expunging certain details of especially revolting character. This, inter alia, is what he stated was seen by him." Okay. "It was a clear, lovely, and moonlit African night. In a large clearing within the forest, a great assembly of Mashona squatted down in a wide circle. The women were ranged on one side. The males, both young and old, squatted opposite to the women. All gorged greedily upon a feast of nearly putrid meat and drank liberal portions of locally brewed beer. And when the requisite stage of drunkenness had been attained, the main part of the ritual began. It was an orgy of such utter depravity and crude obscenity as defies the wildest imagination. The Maganga, the witch doctor, I hope I'm saying that right, but, and I apologize for it, but that's what he calls it, advanced to the center of the arena and started to dance with the most grotesquely fantastic movements. Whilst thus performing, he crooned some kind of song or incantations. His voice became ever more and more animal-like until finally it was quite indistinguishable from that of a jackal calling during the mating season. By this time, all the assembled Mashona of both sexes were stark naked and began behaving in a most obscenely realistic manner. Little enough was left to the imagination. Jaws were hanging down, most of the men slavering and drooling at the lips like animals, and both sexes crawling around on hands and knees, smelling and licking each other like dogs meeting in the street. Then the women howled the love call of the jackal bitch, eager to be mated. The imitation was rendered perfectly. Now the Maganga, in a state of almost inhuman frenzy, collapsed upon the ground in the center of the arena as if suddenly stricken with apoplexy. For a brief time he lay immobile as if dead. Presently, however, he jerked and squirmed his limbs exactly like a person suffering from an epileptic fit. This continued for an appreciable time. Suddenly, however, he became immobile once more and remained as rigid as a corpse upon the ground. Meanwhile, the scene enacted by both sexes of the assembled Africans can only be described as the height of depraved license and sex perversion. It was utterly nauseating to behold. What then transpired does not even bear thinking about or remembering, let alone mentioning by any decent-minded human being. The climax was not delayed unduly. The Maganga rose slowly into an upright position, performed a few grotesque gyrations, and collapsed again upon the ground with blood and saliva frothing from his lips in a steady flow. It was all real enough. From outside the arena now sounded in my ears the quite unmistakable calls of a jackal, so realistic as to impel me to twist around upon my perch to watch the jackal come bounding into the midst of the congregation of Mashona. A young girl, stark naked and probably about 17 years of age, came crawling into the arena. She was accompanied by a naked youth of a slightly older age. What the couple then did, however, is best left unrecorded. Every single action performed by this pair was grossly indecent. The previously witnessed imitations had been quite reasonably lifelike in their character, but the girl and boy were positively uncanny in their realistic portrayal of the habits of mating jackals. I kept rubbing my eyes and felt just horrible about this thoroughly obscene exhibition. It is utterly impossible to describe what were my exact actual reactions to this disgusting scene of the rankest depravity, but there was experienced a large measure of fear, mingled with an acute sense of utter revulsion at what my eyes were beholding. I am not especially squeamish, but was conscious of nausea at the pit of my stomach. Although the majority may laugh at the statement, this is the part that I find to be, well, a lot of this is like telling, but it is interesting. Although the majority may laugh at the statement, yet I must admit my sensations were unearthly. Most certainly they were abominably unpleasant when, all of a sudden and without any sort of warning as to what was imminent, I saw two jackals in the center of the arena instead of the boy and girl.
No.
I am prepared to take my oath about this being factual.
What?
Both girl and boy had vanished completely from sight. There was no possible doubt about this. Not the very slightest whatsoever. They were jackals. In my time, I have seen far too many of the species of fauna for any possibility of being mistaken about what my eyes actually viewed.
Wow.
There was the...
What year was this written?
Yeah.
What year was this?
1933 was the Rhodesian doctor writing this. The article's from 1954.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, he saw something, folks.
There was the Maganga stretched out upon the ground and apparently unconscious. I am tempted to say the man was in a trance, and there were two jackals romping about the arena and behaving in a grossly obscene fashion close to the inert Maganga's body lying prostrate upon the ground. They even went up to him and nosed his nude body several times with that familiar curiosity which is such an outstanding characteristic of this species. Nothing possibly could have been more uncannily realistic. Finally, the pair of jackals bounded off into the nearby forest, running side by side with bodies almost touching. By now, all the Africans, men, women, and young alike, were out to the wide. Yet soon afterwards, and I think very significantly, the Maganga seemed to recover himself and gradually stood erect. He too departed from the scene, walking away slowly in the wake of the two jackals and being soon lost to my sight in the gloomy depths of the forest. So then the author comes back in of the article who's quoting this. I can explain nothing. The Rhodesian doctor, an actual eyewitness of this amazing incident, was in no better case. It seems quite impossible to draw any conclusions from his evidence except perhaps to suggest that hypnotism was largely responsible for what he thought was observed, and is fully convinced did actually happen. From the details furnished by this European medical eyewitness, orgy seems far too mild a term to describe that night's events. They were things that do almost mock the grasp of thought. I have witnessed many astounding feats performed by African witch doctors, and also watched Indian magicians doing the famed rope trick and others. Because of this, I am tempted to believe that the audience had successfully been hypnotized. It is true that some of the African witch doctors are palpably no more than the crudest of charlatans, yet other members of their ancient craft do display an astounding degree of skill.
Wow.
It is interesting that, in reading, I'm not sure what to make of, his theory. And obviously, I think you can, before I talk about what I was going to talk about just now, I think you can take a lot of things about this. Like, I think that obviously you can read, like, the kind of racial element and his, like, ability to, like, perceive these people as animals, especially given the context of Rhodesia. How, like, the hypnotism thing, like, I don't know, maybe, and that was, this is what I was going to say, that was an explanation that was used for, like, witches, actually. Even in Beware the Cat, like, we were talking about before, this kind of early novel from the 16th century CE. It's kind of an anti-Catholic tract.
Yeah,
and
there's a lot of that
which is kind of interesting. And he talks about, like, witches and their transformation into cats. It's kind of a dialogue where one character is like, well, but come on, witches are much bigger than house cats, so how could they turn into cats? It doesn't make any sense. And it's like, well, that he says that's not what happens. You're being like these pope papists, and you're this is a popish fallacy that you like, for instance, taking Jesus out of the heavens and putting him in a cracker. That's not what happens. It actually is like, they can deceive people into seeing them as cats.
Hmm.
Or they send their spirit out and they put it into the animal. But they don't,
Interesting. That's the
like
familiar thing,
transform
having a
physically.
familiar.
Um,
Yeah, they don't morph, but they like astral project and like
yeah, that's
ride a
and
cat.
yeah. Or they use basically what is being described here, like here by this author in his theory of this, or what he makes of this story. That it's some kind of mind trick or an illusion. Um,
Right, like a
yeah,
collective, like a hypnosis induced collective hallucination, kind of.
yeah,
That like they all saw the same thing, but the sort of shaman was conjuring a sort of hypnotic trance state. And there's no mention in that of
yeah.
like ingesting any like psychotropic herbs or drugs or anything, right?
No, definitely not the Rhodesian doctor who like experienced this.
Right.
Um,
Highly doubtful that he would have been partaking. Though it was in, I guess it was a sort of a different, it was in South Africa later on where 2CB was imported as like a supplement for the normal like herbs that were ingested during shamanic rituals. Remember that?
yeah.
But I guess, the nature of these rituals sometimes is like, yeah, that actually this state can kind of be achieved without drugs, necessarily. Like, I guess if the collective kind of trance vibe is like heightened enough, then I don't know. It's still odd though, right? I mean, this is like a serious scientist, like standing here watching this sort of Burning Man, like Diddy orgy kind of thing happen, but then he sees people literally turn into jackals.
Well, it's interesting that you called it a Diddy orgy, because that's kind of the connection that I was going to make partially, and I think again it's broad strokes, but I feel like, this is operating kind of on this like subliminal level where it is interesting that, and again, like we don't have like any descriptions from the African participants in this ritual. If we even have it isn't like a fictional story that this guy told to tell for some kind of weird ass reason, which he may have.
You can't rule that out.
Like
Yeah.
he's considered to be like a reliable eyewitness, but that's the whole thing. That's where like this whole element comes in, where it's like, oh, this like Rhodesian doctor, like we can trust him, but we like
Hmm.
if an African said that, then like that would be just like superstitious bullshit. But it is interesting, like how in terms of the British press, which again, in and of itself, is kind of like a little bit of like a foreign import, because it's like sort of cultivated by Rupert Murdoch in a way, who's like not, from the UK originally, like into its like current form. But it is
That's
interesting
true.
how like the British tabloid media does have this kind of like sensationalistic, like you'd almost say like conspiratorial character,
Yeah.
right? And one element, like, British big cats like are this sort of big cat motif, this big cat flap, you could call it, like extended
Mhm.
flap, is one manifestation of that. But it also manifests like in other ways. For instance, like the like kind of like a pedo gate, not Pizzagate per se, but like, with Jimmy Savile and all that stuff, right?
Right, of
Like that's
course.
another thing that's like constantly, or like the intrigues of like secret groups like among, the elites and things like that in the UK, or like, and government cover-ups, around like various issues, like
Right.
I guess probably one of the most stereotypical ones is like, they're transing our kids, they're transing our kids, I'm trying to do British Alex
That's a
Jones, but
more
it's too many
popular
different
one.
voices
Yeah,
for me.
in recent years.
Yeah. And that's also like, kind of has the same theme of like transformation in a way, but yeah,
And
it's
anxiety around sort of
yeah.
transformation. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. No, you
Yeah.
you could see something like that going on.
And it's interesting how that gets folded into like kind of the, I think maybe something that makes it a bit more explicit. Okay, yeah, we have time. Something
Yeah.
that makes it a bit more explicit is this article that I read. Did you read this one? This one was really good, I thought, about appearances of beasts and mystery cats in France by Véronique Campion-Vincent.
Yeah, I wasn't able to get past the full paywall for some reason. Even
Oh,
with my account login, I couldn't get past it. But I did read
that's
like the
lame.
opening of it about
Yeah.
sightings of these things in France and like the sort of kind of similar vibes to the article I read about Britain and like the attitudes of
Yeah.
farmers and people in the rural countryside, right?
Yeah.
Like, Was
Hmm.
this the thing where it was like there were like constant rumors about people importing foxes from Germany and like unleashing them in the French countryside for like vague but nefarious purposes all the time? And like the government like
Yeah.
wasn't owning up to it. And like, yeah, like what was the deal with like I kept when they talked about like Fox importing and also like Viper release, right? That was the one
Yeah,
about
that was
Viper
the one at the
release.
very beginning. We were talking
Like
about
what the
Viper
fuck?
release.
Who's
Yeah.
releasing Vipers into the French countryside?
Well,
Like
that's the
calm
thing.
down, you
Like,
know?
that's what I'm talking
Or was
about. Where
that
like
fake?
in
I don't
he
know.
talks about how like there's always like the kind of human element here, right? Like where he talks about how only like it's become a thing nowadays where like we don't even think that like wolves ever killed like an animal on their own. And that it must have been like some kind of like human agent. Like this is kind of it's interesting. He kind of has like a sort of a wokeness like taken away where like we have like become woke about like
Wolves?
animals and wolves. Yeah, and like
Okay.
we no longer like we like kind of we've revised history in a way where like let me see if I can find the part where he talks about it. This is what he talks about. He talks about the new conception of wildlife. The ancient dichotomy that distinguished in nature cultivated and humanized areas producing resources from wild areas whose ever-menacing expansion had to be contained by endless labor has been succeeded by an opposition between industry, to which the rationalized and highly productive agriculture claims to belong, and nature, which mixes rural areas left on the margins of these highly productive zones and wild nature and natural parks, the whole belonging to third type zoos, unfenced animal parks whose limit is the whole rural space. Nature becomes a resource to be defended against the encroachments of men, and the obnoxious or evil wild animal of yesterday, rehabilitated and reintroduced, is transformed into the emblem of these spaces recaptured from polluting mankind, of this protected nature. In such a conception, the notion of pests, animals considered as harmful because they damage the production of humans, even humans themselves, is no longer legitimate. It is as an example of human folly that one recalls the destruction of vipers, small carnivorous mammals, ferrets, weasels, skunks, and vixens, and wolves was fostered and encouraged by official authorities. The only pests recognized as such are proliferating animal populations, especially in urban areas, pigeons, insects, or rats. Words become taboo as the concept is rejected. The terms pests or vermin are no longer acceptable. From scientists to militants, a whole sector of public opinion actively denounces the truths of yesterday as absurd legends. It is with gusto that these ancient ideas are demolished in the name of biological knowledge, but with a really human passion. If an animal is dangerous, it can only be after it has had contact, probably polluting, with humans. When in beast cases many sheep are killed, this behavior is systematically called aberrant if the guilty party turns out to be a wild animal, and it is automatically assumed that it must have had contact with humans. Yeah, like he talks about how we now call like seal cubs babies, but I thought seals were always pups anyway.
I
But
thought they were pups too. Unless the maybe that's sea
yeah,
lions.
whatever. But I feel
Sea
like that's kind of like
lion.
a
What's up with that? No, they're not really
yeah,
lions though.
wow. Damn.
I'm not
But
coming for the sea lions. They're very cute. They don't seem
yeah,
evil. I
yeah.
got the
So
article now. Yeah, this is all pretty interesting. The appearances of beasts and mystery cats in France.
yeah, right. He basically goes on to talk about how like they only like if you like some people these days believe that have ever he's this is he's talking about the beast of Gévaudan, sorry.
Hmm.
We think we talked about it before. Passionate wolf lovers have launched a major campaign of rehabilitation, asserting that wolves have never killed anyone except wolves suffering from rabies, and maybe not even then. Although Trésor de la langue française still defines the Gévaudan beast as an animal that sowed terror in the great area of France from 1765 till 1787, and was revealed as a loup cervier, the same thing that loup cervier. I don't what do they mean by loup cervier? A wolf cervier. What is it? I guess a lynx. I guess it was
Oh,
revealed as a
okay.
lynx. So there you
Okay.
go. Though historians still talk of several wolves in succession the same reason, and in most present-day articles and books, the story of the Gévaudan beast is rewritten as fantasy so as to exonerate wolves. The beast is alleged to have been a sadistic killer, a Protestant settling his scores with the Catholic inhabitants of Gévaudan, a tame hyena, a bear. Did you ever see that movie Brotherhood of the Wolf?
Is that the what's his name? Michael Haneke? Or is that the
Uh,
Time of the Wolf?
no, I don't think it's a Michael
I
Haneke movie.
remember I didn't see Brotherhood of the Wolf. I remember getting those movies mixed up. I saw the
Yeah,
Manatee
yeah,
one.
yeah, yeah.
But
No, this is about like the Beasts of Gavadon or a similar situation where basically
okay.
spoiler, but there is like kind of that element to it where it's like, there's a conspiracy. It's not just an animal. But anyway, so yeah, one is faced with a systematically constructed interpretation as complicated as a set of explanations and hypotheses concerning Jack the Ripper's identity or the real perpetrators in John Fitzgerald Kennedy's murder, by which admittedly interests a much more restricted public. These campaigns have been very successful, and a cryptozoologist participating in the spring of 1990 in a TV discussion program about wolves told me the historian of the group was the only one who still believed wolves had killed people in the old days. So I mean, it's kind
Wow.
of funny. I think he's like kind of like, he's kind of like this is also kind of a thing that reminds me a little bit of Trump, where he has like that, like he's like sharks should all die or like whatever, like they kill people, like folks, like they just let all the sharks die.
The naked
It's sort of like,
fish. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, like I get it. Like obviously, maybe people who go too far and sort of laundering the reputation of violent wolves, but it's a weird hang up to have, but anyway,
Yeah,
yeah,
the
I think he does
radical
have an
PETA
interesting,
apologists for the killer wolves.
yeah, yeah, but I think he does have an interesting point that, like, in a lot of these stories or a lot of these sort of media suspicions, there's always like an evil kind of human force that is involved in some way. Like
Right, right.
yeah, like let me like do a search for evil human because I believe he uses that exact word, and he talks about this as kind of being like a successor belief to the idea of like lycanthropy or human transformation into animals. The controversies that have surrounded and still do surround the reintroduction of lynxes are well known to our interviewees. So yeah, they actually did reintroduce them. They have conferred a new legitimacy and apparent rationality on these gratifying anecdotes. One can tell them without sounding credulous or ridiculous, and in Drome, the locals seize upon the facts of lynxes discovered on the occasion of the sudden appearance of an exceptional beast. Everyone in 1990 expressed doubts about the exceptional animal. Was it real or just an illusion? But belief in ubiquitous lynxes, including the authorities, everyone told me, we've got them. We've got lots of them here. However, it is still in small groups and in an atmosphere of trust that these stereotyped anecdotes are told. They are meant to be relished and shared rather than to be believed. These are tales that entail from the listener this willing suspension of disbelief, characteristic of legends both traditional and contemporary. Spoor and hair are molded, measured, and analyzed. Phone calls are made to zoo directors. However, this apparent scientism masks traditional elements that are numerous in these cases. Thus, the variability of the sightings that could lead one to imagine a whole array of wild beasts is already present in a letter from the Lozère Préfet to the Ministry of the Interior on the 17th of October, 1809. There is no agreement as to this animal species. Some say it is a big wolf, others that it is like a bear. A peasant who saw the second child's abduction by this beast stated to the lieutenant de Louvetrerie that it was the size of a donkey and had brown fur. Finally, the mayor of Saint-André Capeze told me that, according to the information, he gathered the animal has the approximate size of a big wolf, a spiky blackish mane along its back, a long bushy tail, and an extremely long muzzle. The same variability can be noticed in the case of the Valais monster in Switzerland in 1946, where statements of witnesses would lead one to think there was a lynx, 5 panthers, and a puma. Also, the behavior attributed to the animal is stereotyped and contradictory. Too bold and unafraid of men, but also elusive, wild-looking, and aggressive. Yesterday explained as a sign of devilish origin or of a werewolf-type metamorphosis, this trait is now rationalized and given as proof of domestic origin or of continued control by an evil human master.
Yeah, that was actually just like the Ahnenerbe. Himmler's like occult guys like sneaking through the rat lines through Switzerland, actually disguised in werewolf mode, in Operation
Yeah.
Werewolf mode. That's probably
Hmm.
what that was. 1946. I mean, I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah, there was this animal called the Vosges beast. I mean, I know that we're going a little bit afield from the British big cat topic, but this is
Hmm.
close enough. Well, that's something that I want to get into in a second. Is like Britain is very obsessed with France, and these countries have been obsessed with each other for a long time. And so I feel like that it factors in more than you would think, and it's appropriate to contextualize this in the broader topic of European big cats.
Sure.
But many hypotheses were built up as to the exact nature of the Vosges beast. It was often seen, and by many varied witnesses. It was even photographed. However, it was neither found nor caught and disappeared mysteriously. The damage stopped on the 15th of November as suddenly as it had started. This was, in 1977 and 1978, that it had this sort of reign of terror killing all these sheep. At first, the creature's behavior was that of an animal of domestic origin, not intimidated by its encounters with humans, not menacing towards those it met. After the drives and pursuits, the animal became more elusive and escaped with intelligence and a very sure instinct from the groups hunting it. Early on, this case attracted the attention of sociologists of rumor, and still routinely alluded to by passionate lovers of wildlife. It is a prototype of the release accusations launched nowadays whenever beasts and mystery casts are cited. An idea which was widespread at the time was that the Vosges beast was a ferocious, I hope I'm saying that right too, Vosges, I don't know, was a ferocious trapped animal which its owner set upon flocks for his personal sadistic gratification. Sorry for anyone who's from there. I can't even pronounce the name of where you're from, but
your local cryptid, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm insulting. Yeah, exactly. People talked about an animal acting under remote control, whose master used a high-frequency whistle, and which was transported by car to the sites of its evil deeds. The German industrialist who had just bought and reorganized the Verrières Wood, situated in the Rambervilliers forest, in which he had put up a fenced boar park, erected miradors and feeding points for deer, hired guards and ordered them to shoot stray dogs that wandered in his domain, was a favorite target of the first accusations. However, he easily exonerated himself when questioned by the gendarmes who had summoned him. In the articles of 1977, this hypothesis of the manipulated animal was given an equal importance to that of a feral but autonomous animal, perhaps a hybrid of dog and wolf. However, it is now the best known because it has been promoted vigorously by groups of passionate lovers of wildlife. These groups have endorsed and publicized these theories of human manipulation which exonerate a wild and therefore good animal. For them, aggression could only come from humans. Thus, these authors state that the beasts cause damage mostly at weekends. However, this assertion is unsupported by the latest book on the case, based on a thorough inquiry. Yeah. So, I don't know.
Interesting.
And you can see the parallel there with like some of the, the British cases. Although there is a little bit of a difference because people also really want them to be like a breeding population, but also,
you always have that with the hard materialist Bigfoot people. They're really hung up on like nailing it down in a traditional scientific category, and for whatever reason.
Well, but it can't be escaped, or like they don't want it to be like associated with or too influenced by people. I mean, maybe like that element is still there where like humans are like encroaching on it or something, and like they want this wildness to like return. So there's still kind of this yearning to escape like industrial
he just
civilization.
Wants to be left alone.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
kind of
right.
vibe.
Yeah. So that's like still kind of there, but they like don't want them to just be, because that is an explanation that's like would be equally viable to more viable from like more viable by any metric than the idea that even if it doesn't explain the full phenomenon, it would be more viable than by any metric than the idea there's a breeding population of these large like panthers, other than the Scottish wildcat.
I would say the evidence is pretty shaky on that front, that they wouldn't know. I mean, like we have big cats around Los Angeles, and most of them have been tagged. And in fact, you can sort of like watch their movements on GPS. Like they have names. Some of them become celebrities. So it's like not the hardest thing in the world to catch a cat that is big, hiding out in the periphery of settled areas. And like it just, something else must be happening for these cats to be so good at like evading people but only popping up liminally, right? That doesn't seem to be explainable by
like
mere, they're like really smart cats or something, like another
hence,
thing,
like the necessity of the big cat cover up, right?
I guess the one of the guys in that like Chasing Shadows documentary, the big cat expert, said that the idea when people complain that, well, like that we would have found their dead bodies by now, he was like, no, big cats, like they travel far into the most secluded place they can find, like when they know they're about to die, like kind of similar to dogs, like they go and like hide themselves off somewhere, so it's like actually very rare to come across like a dead big cat because they will have like run off somewhere like very remote and like hid somewhere or something like that. So that's one
kind of
thing
like
in the
a
column
simpler
for
version of my Dogman theory that they are covering themselves up. Or like, or
I
obviously,
mean, yeah, a
they're
dog
Jinn,
man,
but they,
a dog man would be like a
but
dog and
that's the only
go.
way that they could, do it if they were also involved in it, if the dogmen themselves were trying to cover up their existence.
Right,
It
right.
was
I
the
mean,
only thing that
which
could
you think about
possibly
it,
make it
every dogs
plausible.
and cats do
Yeah.
that. They do for whatever reason, like try to die covertly so that they're not discovered. And
Mm,
I mean, it's a
yeah.
strong instinct. So even given that though, I would say that you would capture some of them alive or have much better evidence of like actually seeing them if this was just purely big cats we were talking about. I mean,
Yeah.
then, you're confronted with the fairy hypothesis, the interdimensional hypothesis,
Yeah.
which is wild and, it definitely does not have hard evidence backing it up, but it certainly has like people's subjective experience and like their relationship with the phenomenon um feels more in that vein where this is like a manifestation of like a very primordial fear that is out there and I don't know at the same I'm hesitant to say that the people that have seen things like it sounds like it's usually kind of a scary experience and maybe it's just like a slightly large house cat or a badger or something. But I don't know. It's kind of like with like fairies. Like, well, fairies, I guess, are a little different because they're weird. It's actually not clear what fairies actually look like when Irish people talk about them. You know what I mean? Like sometimes I picture like little gnomes, but then sometimes I picture like a Tinkerbell with like wings, and sometimes I picture like a little leprechaun guy,
I
but
never picture Tinkerbell when I think about like other than, if I'm
the
thinking in the
fairies.
context of like Disney or something. I don't know.
Right,
Like,
right.
yeah.
I was thinking one kind of flying around
The
a little bit.
Cottingley fairies kind of look like Tinkerbell.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fake. Those are fake fairies, of course.
Yeah. I feel like when I think about Irish fairies, I always think, yeah, like of little people, like
Mhm.
little weird
I guess the
people,
wee
like
folk,
sus, like
yeah.
puckwudgies, like that type of
But
thing. Yeah.
yeah, but this is I don't know.
Yeah.
Like there is a deep symbolic resonance with like big cats, like symbolizing might and power, as the French essay says.
hmm
And like standing for greed, ferociousness, violence, but also seduction and beauty. I don't
hmm
know.
Yeah, like that article also talks about like the type of people who like yeah, it's interesting like both this article and the other one, Alien Big Cat Sightings in Britain, a Possible Rumor Legend,
Hmm.
by Michael Goss, which I also want to talk about. They kind of like do a little bit of analysis of like the media coverage, which I think is like they could do a little bit of breakdown, like in this article, the Veronique Vincent's Campion Vincent's article. Um, this repertory feeds conversational exchanges in articles in newspapers and magazines. It is manipulated by social groups directly affected by the cases and the disputes that oppose these groups, especially as to place that should be allocated to wildlife, are reflected in the interpretations they give to the strange apparition. Several subgroups can be distinguished. A. Bodies of social control, police and gendarmes, administrations, local representatives whose role is to control the public and to maintain law and order. B, experts from the local amateur to the professional, like the veterinary, and to the scientist or the envoy of the authorities, like Veronique Herrenschmidt, mandated by the ONC. Their logic is different from that of the bodies of social control, even if they act as their auxiliaries. Official experts reach predictable conclusions. The mystery animal is domestic, stray dog or feral cat, or if it is a wild species, it is a pet or an ex-captive. Same situation with in
Hmm.
Britain. Sheep farmers and cultivators. Victims of damage that sometimes puts in danger of bankruptcy these professionals whose economic survival is difficult on today's competitive scene. Sheep farmers center their argument on the damage caused by uncontrolled animals, whether wild and protected or domestic and impossible to identify. Sheep farmers are the only subgroup to pay serious attention to the damage caused by stray dogs. The partial data I consulted, drawn from research conducted in the Rhone-Alpes region by the National Sheep Association, shows that the sheep farmers consider they are insufficiently protected. The law considering first the dog owner's rights. They do not get the measures they call for to be able to destroy dogs straying near their flocks, to obtain that local mayors enforce the rules against stray dogs, and compulsory insurance for dog owners. Hunters, this
Yeah.
is another group, participating in the search parties in rural areas, they stress the usefulness of their role, insisting upon their proficiency and technical skills, and associating themselves with the social control bodies and the experts. And the last one, E, nature protectors. They intervene to attack hunters, whom they pronounce both incompetent and ferocious, and to defend the wild animals, thus preferring interpretations stressing human responsibilities, neglectfulness, or malevolence of the owners. Some of them take pretext of these cases to remind the public they still dream of reintroducing in the French countryside predators whose disappearance has diminished our cultural heritage. So yeah, it's an interesting like breakdown of these different factions, and it does kind of remind me like not only of the British big cat context, but like the sort of politicization of like ranchers and farmers in the US too. Like I'm
It's
much
very
less
stand
familiar
your
like
ground
generally
kind of
with the
law.
European context, but it kind of reminds me like you were saying like cattle mutilation, but also like, there was like that cattle die off like a few years ago. I'm sure there have been
Hmm.
them since that I just didn't hear about. But like, when people were saying like, oh, like they did the, like they're like someone was shooting like microwaves at like their cattle to make them die, something like that, or it
I
was some
do
kind of
kind of
like,
remember that. Yeah.
yeah, like I don't
Yeah.
know, like they
Or
did
the
something.
bird flus that are kind of going
Yeah,
around and causing mass kill-offs. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. And even, I mean,
exactly.
we talked about, yeah, with the cattle mutilations, like there were ranchers in Montana that were like shooting at government helicopters that would like fly over
Hmm.
their ranches because they were so convinced that some kind of weird secret government project was killing all their cattle, but also like it was part of this like social economic anxiety about the government like secretly screwing them over and like destroying their livestock, their crops, like trying to encroach on their land, et cetera, et cetera. And kind of yeah, I think maybe
Exactly.
you could see
Yeah.
a lot of grievances like in this context when the big cat thing is like, oh, the government doesn't like, they're covering it up. Like for some vague purpose, they are not willing to acknowledge the big cat plague that is going on. And maybe it's like to not cause public panic, but also there is this kind of like this paranoia that like the other essay said in the French context of like people like shadowy trucks coming in and like dumping off like foxes or like vipers to like
Hmm.
upset the balance of whatever animals are like out there in favor of like some other thing, maybe to cause economic damage to like one group of people. Like were the French people complaining about herons, like there was a population of like seagulls and herons was like
Yeah,
too
yeah.
aggressive and
They were
they were
harmfully proliferating. Um,
right,
yeah,
right.
exactly.
And then I
Hmm.
guess I wasn't sure what the fox thing was, like importing foxes to like hunt, or I don't know, like to hunt what exactly? Like why were they secretly importing foxes from Germany? They said a truck like got into an accident and tipped over and it was just like bursting with foxes that like ran out. Um
Hmm.
I assume we're talking about living foxes and not that like they're secretly killing foxes and like taking them away for their
For
fur or something.
Vipers, assertions of organized releases carried out from aircraft have been persisted since the mid 70s, have persisted since the
Right.
mid 70s, accusing first serum-producing labs, then nature protectors and officials. These stories are connected to changes in the practices which exploited these strongly tabooed animals and have been reinforced by the 1979 decrees that outlawed the trade in them. After the collective emotions of the early 80s, the phenomenon has entered a more diffuse and stable phase, but it is still vigorous, and organized viper releases are regarded as true facts by several diversified sections of the French population. Three independent studies of the phenomenon have been conducted. For foxes, the tales are unstructured, but now and then one hears that people reintroduce them. Thus, after having exposed viper release practices, an elderly woman, farmer, declared in November 1986 the social anthropologist Solange Penton and Cruz, they put back plenty of those sorry. They put back plenty of broken boxes of vipers. They talked about it on the radio. It's disgusting. It's the same with foxes. Hunters destroy them, then bring back whole lorry loads of them. Interesting. So the hunters bring them back,
It's like
like
confusing
just so
what
they can hunt
everyone's so
them.
angry about and why people are dropping vipers from helicopters and shit. Like what was
This is
going
an
on in
amazing
France in the
story. In
80s?
autumn
Like
1990, an acquaintance living in rural Mayenne told me that in his village, a truck coming from Germany had been discovered overturned after a track accident loaded with foxes.
no. Yeah, see like why are they
That's
doing this?
amazing.
Yeah, loaded with
Um,
foxes.
yeah.
And
Um,
then he just moves on to talk about, mysterious beasts, large felines and lynxes, but I'm like I want to know more about this weird intrigue with like Viper. Is it implied that like environmentalists were doing this and a kind of like they must be reintroduced to
Well,
the
yeah,
natural habitat
exactly. I think
or
that's the
something?
idea, or like I think it's the same like anxiety or the same idea that like, and again, I'm not like saying that there couldn't be like something to this, but it's the same idea as like, the government doesn't care about ranchers, which like, definitely is like a widely held political sentiment, probably like, in the US and like about farmers in general, they care about urbanites more, blah, blah, blah.
Mhm.
Like you hear about this in the US, like in Europe, I'm sure also like the government doesn't care about us. They prioritize other people more. It's like the same thing with the farmers were saying, like they care more about the dog owners. They won't let us shoot stray dogs that come to kill our sheep, like, and things like that. So it's like, that escalates into this idea that not only are they not like considering our needs and they're prioritizing the needs of other people and even the needs of animals, like they're actually releasing dangerous animals to kill our sheep for some sinister purpose. Maybe, yeah, for environmental reasons, which is a thing. Like, like people do want to reintroduce, if in France, for instance, they want to reintroduce lynxes. And like you can see that tension in the British big cat discourse as well, where
Mhm.
like generally, like if those are like if actual like big panthers, cougars, like stuff like that, are like wandering around like the British countryside, that's like an anomaly that needs to be like dealt with, like or yeah, like it's a sign of someone breaking the law, right? And then but you also have people like, no, this is natural. This is part, this is something that we need to
No
have.
alien big
Um,
cat is illegal. Like
yeah,
they
exactly.
all
Like it does
deserve it.
also
It has a
mirror that.
weird mirror to that kind
It
of
does, yeah. No,
paranoia.
it does. It does. Yeah. But I think it goes down to like the very fact of like that humans like are animals, but also like strongly identify with animals, but also strongly disidentify with them, like
Hmm.
or have a certain like distance at times from them, kind of like, as expressed in that story, the King of the Cats, or in there's another one from Beware the Cat where like there's this group of people who are like wandering. I can just I could just even read it. Hold on.
Hmm.
Since we only have like so much time, this might be a good
A pause
way
point.
to like leave us. But I do want to get to the Michael Goss article and some other stuff and talk like some more about some of these like disclosures and things like that, and like kind of litigate them,
We could read more, yeah, but
Yeah.
the disclosures, the
Yeah.
cover-ups, and like the actual cases,
Yeah, it
that
would be good.
will
Yeah.
chill people to their bones.
Yes, yeah.
But
There's some good big cat cases to talk about here. And yeah, some of those like those releases, like those email exchanges about the big cats and like
oh yeah,
the interpretation of them like is also interesting. But yeah, let me see if I can get this part from Beware the Cat that like kind of bring it back to what I was saying before. Let me see. Oh, yeah, here we go. Ahem. At the time, I was out at night at Cosbury with one of Fitzbury's churls. That's what they call farmers and cottagers there. And we started to talk about strange adventures and cats and various other things, just as we are doing now. This churl told me the following tale. Less than 7 years ago, there was a kern, that's what they call a warrior, of John Butler's who lived in the Fassock of Bantry. His name was Patrick Kapor, and one night he decided to raid Caer McCart, who was an enemy of John Butler. So Patrick and his boy, that's what they call their stablemen, regardless of how old they are, went into enemy territory at night and entered a two-house town where they broke and slew the occupants and stole whatever livestock they could find, which was only a cow and a sheep. They headed homeward, but concerned about pursuit. So this is interesting, livestock killing is here too. But
mhm.
they headed homeward, but concerned about pursuit because the town's mongrels were barking so shrilly, they took a refuge in a church, planning to stay there until after midnight. Patrick was certain no one would pursue them into the church because the heathen Irish, by which we mean Catholics, revered churches so much that, until we taught them otherwise, they wouldn't rob a church or hurt any man who sought sanctuary in a churchyard, even if that person had killed his pursuer's father. While that warrior was in the church, he realized he hadn't eaten much that day, and both of them should have something to eat, it being the old Irish custom to eat at night. He made his stablemen go and gather sticks and make a fire with his flint and striker. They made a fire in the church, which was the church of the heathen persuasion, and killed the sheep, and, in the Irish fashion, they laid it on the fire to roast. When the sheep was cooked, they were ready to eat it. And a cat came into the church and sat beside Patrick. In Irish, the cat said, "Give me some meat." Patrick, quite amazed at this, gave her the quarter that was in his hand. The cat quickly ate it all and for more. This was repeated over and over until the cat had eaten the whole sheep. And like a cormorant, the cat was still not satisfied and still asked for more meat. By then, Patrick and his stablemen were afraid that the cat was the devil in disguise and thought it was wise to please him. They killed and skinned the cow that they had stolen and gave the cat a quarter, which she immediately devoured. Then they gave her two other quarters, and while she was eating them, they used the hide in the country fashion. That is, they cut a piece of the hide and suspended it on four stakes set around the fire, then placed a piece of the cow in the hide sling for themselves. With the rest of the hide, they made wraps to wear about their feet like brogues, both to keep their feet from getting sore the following day and also to serve for meat the next night, if they could get none elsewhere, by grilling the hide wraps upon coals. Such Irish warriors, for lack of meat, will cook and eat their own shoes. So yeah, you can see the anti-Catholicism coming out. But anyway, by this time, the cat had eaten three quarters and still called for more. So they gave her the piece that was heating above the fire. By then, they were sure that she had eaten that meat, that when she had eaten that meat, she would ask for more. And there being no more to be had, she would eat them instead. Fearing this, they fled the church and rode away as fast as they could. They got them out of the church, and the Kern took his horse, and away he rode as fast as he could. When they were a mile or two from the church, the moon began to shine. The stableman spied the cat sitting on his master's horse behind his master. After warning his master, the stableman took his short spear and threw it at the cat, running her through with it. Immediately he did so, a horde of cats appeared and set upon the men. After a long fight with the cats, the stableman was killed and eaten by them, and Patrick was hard pressed to escape, though his horse was one of the best and swiftest steeds. When Patrick got home and removed his harness, which was a mail shirt and gilded leather helmet with an otterskin crest, he was weary and hungry. He sat down by his wife and told her about his adventure. His wife's cat, which she'd owned barely 6 months, pricked up its ears and said, "Have you killed Grimalkin?" and lunged at his face. She sank her teeth into Patrick's throat, and before she could be pulled away, she had choked him to death.
No. Jesus.
So yeah, there's like these cats. We let them into our homes, but can we truly trust them, right? Like we love them, but we also fear them, right?
Apologize to
Yeah.
any cat owners.
But it's also the
I'm gonna go
cycle
to
of
sleep to
violence.
this.
I mean, like I'm not anti-cat. Like I'm pretty pro-cat, as is my
Well, they encountered the
obligation as a
feline.
Muslim.
They encountered the feline justice system after stealing some livestock.
Yeah, it's interesting that
They
that
were
element is there
judged.
too, that it was a raid and they were stealing sheep and cattle. And like the way that these like motifs recur. Also, this is like a reminder to myself too. Well, maybe there's still time to mention it. Yeah, just in case we're gonna come back to this in a second recording session. So I want to make sure I remember. Speaking of the kind of Britain-France rivalry, there's one like pretty famous mythological cat in or presumably maybe based on a historical gin, but certainly a big cat in British folklore, which is the Cath Pulag or Pulag's cat.
Oh yeah,
Which
yeah.
yeah, did you read about this?
I read a little bit
Here we
about.
go.
I read
Yeah.
the original like myths of it, and they're pretty wild.
Yeah.
Let
Yes,
me
yeah.
see.
It's in like the Welsh, like some Welsh triads, dated to the third quarter of the 13th century is the earliest surviving collection of these. Like I'm not sure when they were actually written, but they're old. Let's
They
say that
definitely
they're
come off as old.
yeah, they're very old. Yeah, and they talk about in this one section on the three noble swineherds. They go on about, it's this long kind of like genealogical thing where they're talking about these different swineherds. King Arthur comes out in this too. Pryderi, son of Pwyll, lord of Anwyn, tending the swine of Penderyn, Dafydd, his foster father. These swine were the 7 animals with Pwyll, lord of. I'm totally not gonna like have no idea how to pronounce Welsh
This
at all.
Welsh. Oh yeah,
Lord
yeah.
of
This is
An.
tough.
This word is spelled ANNWFN. So I don't know. I'm sorry. And gave them to Pendarin Dafydd, his foster father. And the place where he used to keep them was Glyn Cwch in Emlyn. And this is why he was called a powerful swineherd, because no one was able to deceive or force him. And the second, Dristan, son of Talwch, tending the swine of March, son of Merchwain. When the swineherd went with a message to Isolt, I'm sure Isolt, yeah, it must be right, Tristan and Isolt.
Yeah.
Anyway, Arthur and March and Kay, I know that's Kay, Sir Kay, right, and Bedwyr were there, all 4. but they did not succeed in getting so much as one pigling, neither by force nor by deception nor by stealth. And the third, Cole, son of Colfrowi, tending to the swine of Dalwer, Dalbin, in Glyn Dalweir in Cornwall. And one of the swine was pregnant. Henwen was her name. And it was prophesied that the island of Britain would be the worse for her womb burden. Then Arthur assembled the army of the island of Britain and set out to seek to destroy her. And then she set off, about to bring forth something. There's a missing part of the manuscript. And at Penhin Ostwin in Cornwall, she entered the sea, and the powerful swineherd after her. And in the wheat field at Gwent, she brought forth a grain of wheat and a bee. And therefore, from that day to this, the wheat field in Gwent is the best place for wheat or for bees. At Loynan in Pembroke, she brought forth a grain of barley and a grain of wheat. Therefore, the barley at Lonion is proverbial. At the hill of Keffertwich in Arfan, she brought forth a wolf cub and a young eagle. The wolf was given to Mirgade and the eagle to Breat, the prince of the north, and they were both the worse for them. And at Lanfair and Arfan, under the black rock, she brought forth a kitten, and the powerful swineherd threw it from the rock into the sea. And the sons of Palug fostered it in Mon to their own harm, and that was Palug's cat, and it was one of the three great oppressions of Mon, nurtured therein. The second was Daronwi, and the third was Edwin, king of Logur. So yeah, I mean, these triads are kind of, the idea is like they pick threes, like they talk about things in threes, but it's a way to obviously three has a certain like symbolic appeal, I guess, or a certain aesthetic value, but so they organize like the information in like groups of three things. Like this is the three great swineherds. But so those are the origins of Pelug's cat, that it kind of came out of this woman's womb, but also out of the sea. And I think you can almost kind of see that in the connection with the British big cats too, because they're always kind of down like in the south, like near the shore. Keeping on the King Arthur topic, the thing I wanted to mention was I found this funny kind of episode related to that talks about King Arthur's fight with Ka Pelug, or Pelug's cat, right? This is like a big deal that he like defeated this cat and like slew it, and there's a lot of stories about him like destroying this cat. But apparently, some of these British chronicles, or these British histories, they mention that King Arthur was actually killed by the cat.
Really?
Yes. Wow. There's this one little marginal note that is made in one manuscript. The French have made a poem about him, that King Arthur was pushed by Capelu, that is, the cat, into the bog, and the cat killed him in war, and then passed to England, and was not slow to conquer it, then wore the crown in the land, and was the lord of the country. Where did they get such a tale? It is a proven lie, God knows.
Okay.
And I think it's amazing I think it's great how outraged that guy is. Like,
yeah, he's really got to get in there and denounce this fake news.
Exactly. Like, that is not true that we were ruled by a cat.
Yeah, how
but it's
dare
almost
you?
Like, what if like it is true?
Why is he so insecure about it?
Exactly. What? Yeah, I think he doth protest too much.
A little bit.
Was King Arthur like slain and replaced by a cat?
A cat imposter on the throne. Wow.
Exactly. And is that like the root of the deep-seated like British anxiety about cats?
Deepest lore. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. And I mean, there was another. Maybe we can talk about this, in the second half. But like Cornwall is a big hotbed of kind of cryptid lore throughout British history, right? Let me see, what was the name of there was a sort of beast, a liminal beast in Cornwall that was like very central to their folklore. I read about the
Cornwall one. I feel like a lot of those places in like southern England have like their own like cat stuff. I feel like they probably see them everywhere, but it seems like mostly in like the far south or the far north.
Yeah, the Beast of Bodmin. That's what I'm thinking. I'm sorry. I'm thinking of in Cornish lore, the Beast of Bodmin is definitely not the only one, but
yeah, there's a couple like big ones, like the Beast of Exmoor. That was a big one too.
Oh, that's another one too. Yeah. And the Beast of Bodmin Moor is a legendary black cat, that stalks the moors. So like
they're once again, around those moors too.
They're always black cats. They're always that seems to be the very common thing, right?
Yeah, much more than you would think, because like it's rare to have like a black leopard like that.
Yeah, so I guess that there is some like secondary lore. Yeah, but the Beast of Broadwin Moor, and yeah, it's kind of, it's in the broader Phantom Big Cat category, but
Yeah, yeah.
Cotswold's Big Cat.
Yeah, there was one in Surrey. I think Surrey had one.
Oh yeah,
That was
Surrey,
a big deal.
definitely. In New Brunswick, there was a Lucifer, a Canadian
Yeah,
lynx.
that's like a lynx.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I
Hmm.
mean, let's see, let me just read the stats real quick of number of big cat sightings by region between 2004 and 2005. Looks like Devon was the champion with 676. Yorkshire had 127, 125 in Scotland, 123 in Wales, Gloucestershire 104, Sussex 103, 99 in Cornwall, 92 in Kent, Somerset 91, Leicestershire 89. So really we're looking at Devon as which I think is, yeah, that's southwest England, right?
Hmm.
Where, and that is where Cornwall is. Sorry. I should know that. But yeah, yeah, this is like Southwest England. So I guess that is like by from like for like a 5-1 margin. That is where most of the big cats were seen in the 2000s.
Hmm.
So and that is where the Beast of Bodmin Moor legend came from, and I think the Beast of Exmoor. I guess there was a big stag called the Emperor of Exmoor that was killed in October 2010,
Okay, but that was
and
just a real stag that
it was
was
just
like
a
big.
big stag, but maybe it was running
Dorset's another
around.
big one. There's a lot of like stuff in Dorset too.
Oh, Dorset.
Um,
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Basically, it seems like everywhere, but it does seem like there is a connection with the water. It seems
Right,
like it
right.
is usually in the coastal areas, that they're up. I mean, it is an island, so there's like kind of water in a lot of places, but yeah.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
read yeah, I think next time it would be good to read this one sus article I found about it was kind of a weird article. It was like a Donna Haraway
Oh no.
analysis. It wasn't by Donna Haraway, but it was like, framework, and
I
it
thought
it
about
sussed me
her.
out. It was
I,
like,
yeah, sorry. I thought about her. What was it? I was looking up something, connected to this, and there's a whole Wikipedia page for fearsome critters, which I didn't realize is like a folkloric category from the
yeah.
early kind of American culture, about like, or in like logging areas, that there would be
Yeah,
like these
that's with like the
giant
yeah.
animals, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's like the animals that have like they're like not they're like kind of like satirical cryptids, like,
Yeah,
most of them
yeah.
people didn't actually believe in. It's like when they have like one side of their body is like longer than the other. It's like, kind of like these goofy sort of
A
stories. Yeah.
fearsome critter, but she loves
Yeah.
critters. Sorry for
She does
interrupting.
she does talk about critters a lot. Yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah. That's one of her like buzzwords. Yeah, speaking of the election, she also, famously donated to Kamala Harris in like 2019.
Yeah, she's been living
She was
Brat
like
Summer for 5 years.
super on board with Kamala Harris like even before she was the actual nominee. So yeah, I kept thinking about that. But yeah, it was about I forget like where it is from, but it's a Black Shuck. It was about Black
Right.
Shuck, who was like a phantom dog that, yeah, like like where is he from? Where's Black Shuck from? He
Was
roamed the coastline and countryside of East Anglia.
right,
Um,
right.
yeah. So yeah, that's kind of, yeah, right on kind of that east side, yeah. But particularly on the coastline, but I guess also the maybe inland countryside. So, but still,
Hmm.
yeah, and that was kind of making the sort of Donna Haraway environmental connection, which I thought was interesting. It might be worth talking about. I also I got annoyed by the article because I get annoyed by any kind of thing where it's like woke polytheism and like woke whatever like Medusa, but like monotheism is uniformly bad. It's like,
Yeah,
all right,
yeah. Sky
relax.
Daddy
You know,
monotheism
like I've
versus
said
like
many times, like I accept like that, there have been like bad instances of people doing things like motivated by like their belief in monothe or whatever the hell. But like, come on. Like it's the most simplistic, lame thing in the world to be like polytheism good, monotheism bad. And also
right.
like historically speaking, like monotheism, especially the monotheisms that have survived to today, usually were the ones that were like, let's not like kill children. Like, let's not like,
Well,
etc.
let's just
So
direct them to the Scottish like mass
certainly in
cat slaughter ritual to summon,
America.
like an evil Jinn cat that'll give you wishes.
Oh yeah, then
Like
they'd be
that's
upset
something.
because that's killing cats and not humans. So
Right, exactly. So, I mean, I
yeah.
think we can agree that both sides have done some bad things, and like not one is automatically, just like impervious to
I would
critique.
yeah
But
say
for the
on
polytheists,
balance, if
because
you
it's
go into
trendy.
like primordial time, like it's talking about like Sumeria and being like, oh, woke Sumeria, like give me a break. Like, come on. Like, yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. Be like, well, this slave
Um
society was actually like, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, no,
exactly. Like where
exactly.
like people's like slaves are mass killed so they could be interred with them. Like this is like black excellence or whatever. Like,
Yes,
I'm
exactly. I
not
think,
like saying, that like those cultures don't have like elements to be admired and or that like that was, not something that we can like contextualize and like that it
yeah,
needs to be like completely, but it's like kind of like when you're just like sort of attacking the idea of my I don't know, what my point of view is. So
I do.
it's natural that I would be aggrieved by that like kind of like facile thing.
Right, right.
Yeah,
Which
like
I largely share your belief, just in the
yes.
sense of like there's not that easy way of an out to like the religion problem of like just being a polytheist or something. I mean, first of all,
It's
we're
like
like
this thing that you
divorced
see a
from those
lot in these kind
traditions,
of
but
like lame, like the sort of like critical, like not even like critical theory, but this lame kind of like where like it's like this like simplistic things like, oh, like curvy is good and queer and like straight lines are bad. It's like that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Like no shape is inherently bad. I'm sorry. Like it just is, or like even the Deleuze thing of like
um
rhizomes versus trees. Like shut up. Like it's just like that. It's that type of thing where it's like the chthonic. She talks about like the chthonic ones. She like in this article calls that dog, that mythical dog, or that
uh-huh.
demonic evil dog that is like uniformly described as like trying to kill people and like breathe fire in their faces and eat them,
Right.
is like one of these chthonic ones that will save us from the capital scene or whatever. It's like why? Like, why are you embracing with the satanic dog? Like, just
I don't know.
relax.
I don't
Like,
know. Yeah, they love
just
the
like
black
chill
dog. They
out.
want to
Like,
adopt the rescue black
yeah.
dog and live with it. Yeah, yeah.
Like, I mean, I have a dog. I like dogs. It's not about dogs. It's like, this is a demon. Like, I'm just
Right, right.
it's a shaitanic jinn that is like trying to eat people and breathe fire and, I like yeah, I mean, whatever. Like I'm sympathetic to like obviously environmentalism and like to an extent like I think that sometimes the sort of backlash like human exceptionalism. Anyway, we're out of time. But I think sometimes that backlash goes a bit too far, but like, it has some points, but
Right,
yeah.
right. I mean, we want to seek a nice balance, but yeah,
we'll
yeah.
return.
We'll return to some deeper theoretical shit and some spooky big cat tales.
We're not
in the
done
second
with the
half
big
of
cats. Yeah. We'll be going.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
Not at all. But we'll be back shortly with that. But until then, dear listeners, stay vigilant.